Hello there, and welcome to Planet in Question, a quiet corner where curiosity doesn't hurry and wonder takes the scenic route. Tonight, we are drifting into a thought that is both unsettling and strangely comforting. What if the very first civilizations on Earth left no trace at all? Not just forgotten cities buried beneath deserts or drowned beneath seas, but whole cultures erased so completely that even the ground beneath our feet has no memory of them. It sounds almost impossible, doesn't it? Civilization feels like something permanent. We walk through ruins of stone, we see monuments weathered but still standing after thousands of years, and we assume that the imprint of humanity or any intelligent species must surely last. And yet, when you look at the Earth with enough patience, you begin to see that it is not a careful archivist but a restless recycler, constantly rewriting its own story. Before we go too deep into that thought, let me pause and ask you something grounding. Where are you listening from right now? Maybe you're tucked into bed, lights low, your room a quiet shell against the night. Maybe you're listening with headphones while sitting by a window, the street outside humming softly, the world carrying on as you drift into slower rhythms. Or perhaps you've just stumbled across this in the middle of the day, looking for a way to let your mind wander away from its usual loops for a little while. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, here we are sharing this moment across distance and circumstance, bound by a simple question. Could the Earth have hosted civilizations before us, civilizations that time itself has erased? When you first let that question settle in, it seems absurd. Civilization means monuments, artifacts, tools, records. We imagine archaeologists dusting off pottery shards, deciphering tablets, reconstructing temples stone by stone. How could something as grand as a civilization disappear so completely that even its memory was wiped away? But here is where Earth surprises us. This planet has a way of erasing itself. The continents you see on a map today are only temporary arrangements, drifting on slow currents of stone, colliding and splitting apart like rafts on a restless sea. Oceans rise and fall, swallowing coastlines. Mountains rise and crumble. Volcanoes bury landscapes, glaciers grind them flat, rivers carve away their edges grain by grain. The Earth is not a library storing every chapter neatly in order. It is more like a book written on dissolving paper, its pages replaced again and again. Think of our own cities. Imagine, just for a moment, that humanity vanished tonight. In a few decades, vines would be crawling over skyscrapers. Windows would shatter in storms, roofs would collapse. 100 years from now, most of our great cities would be forests of steel skeletons breaking apart under rust and weather. A few thousand years, and forests would have swallowed the concrete. Rivers would have changed course. The traces of roads and towers would fade into scattered outlines, barely distinguishable from natural ridges. 1,000,000 years later, after tectonic shifts and layers of sediment, almost nothing would remain. Perhaps a thin chemical scar in the rocks, maybe a few odd isotopes from nuclear testing, a faint line of plastic compressed into stone. That would be all. And if that is true of us creatures who blanket the planet with satellites and megacities, how much easier would it be for an earlier civilization to disappear? This idea isn't meant to claim proof, but simply to open a space of wonder. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Our entire species has existed for a flicker compared to that span. Written history stretches back only about 5,000 years. The oldest human-built structures we can point to are 12,000 years old at most. And yet between 12,000 years and 4.5 billion, there is so much space. Whole worlds could have risen and fallen in that abyss of time without us ever knowing. It is like holding a library where almost every book has been burned, and we are left with only the last few surviving pages. We assume that because the first chapter we have begins with us, we must be the first. But perhaps there were other chapters before ours, chapters written in languages we cannot decipher because even the letters themselves have been erased. Sometimes this line of thought is given a name, the Silurian hypothesis. It was proposed by a pair of scientists who asked, quite seriously, how we might recognize the existence of an industrial civilization millions of years after it had disappeared. Not by monuments, because those would not last. Not by tools or bones, because those would crumble or be recycled by geological processes. Instead, we would need to look for subtle changes in the geological record. Layers of unusual metals, sudden spikes in carbon dioxide, isotopes that do not appear naturally. The unsettling conclusion is that while it might be possible to notice such things, it would be very easy to overlook them as well. A strange line of minerals in a cliff face could be dismissed as a natural feature. A chemical oddity might be catalogued without anyone realizing it was artificial. In other words, it is possible that we have already walked past the faint remains of something ancient, never realizing what they meant. But the point of this journey isn't to argue for certainty. It is to let your imagination wander into the space between evidence and possibility. To picture Earth not as a blank waiting for us, but as a host that has carried countless experiments across its vast lifespan. Some experiments left fossils, trilobites, ammonites, dinosaurs. Others left stone ruins that we walk among. But perhaps there were attempts at something more organized, something intelligent, that left no trace at all. Perhaps their materials were fragile, their landscapes swallowed by the sea, their structures melted into the slow churn of tectonic time. Perhaps what they built was never stone and steel, but something we would not even recognize as civilization. This thought does not diminish humanity. If anything, it expands the frame around us. We are not necessarily the first nor the last. We are part of a story that is so vast we cannot see its beginning or its end. And whether or not lost civilizations truly existed, their possibility reminds us of our own fragility. We imagine permanence, but permanence is an illusion. Even our proudest monuments will one day fade into the same silence that may have swallowed worlds before ours. What remains is not the stone, not the steel, but the wonder, the quiet realization that we are part of a living planet with an ancient, restless memory. So tonight, as we begin this slow journey through the question of forgotten civilizations, let's let go of certainty. Let's rest instead in possibility, in the idea that the Earth has more stories than we can read, and that our own story is only one among them. Breathe with that thought. Let it settle softly, because whether or not the first civilizations left traces, whether they existed at all, the real wonder is that the Earth keeps carrying life forward, again and again, through cycles of erasure and renewal. And right now, in this fleeting moment, we are here, asking questions beneath the same stars that look down on every chapter that came before us. Chapter 1. Earth's forgetful nature. If you spend enough time looking at the Earth not as a backdrop for our lives, but as a restless being in its own right, you begin to notice something extraordinary. This planet does not like to keep records. It is not an archivist, carefully preserving every trace of what has happened upon its surface. It is, instead, a recycler. It tears pages from its own book and rewrites them again and again. The mountains we see today are not ancient in the way we imagine. They have risen, crumbled, and risen again. The oceans are not eternal either. They expand and contract, swallowing coastlines and exposing plains, erasing whatever stories might have been written there. In this way, the Earth is forgetful, not in the sense of being careless, but in the sense of constantly moving forward, sweeping away yesterday's marks as it makes new ones. Think about what happens to even the most enduring landscapes. A valley carved by a glacier may last for thousands of years, yet eventually rivers change course, landslides bury slopes, and the contours shift until the original shape is only hinted at. A desert dune field looks timeless, but the dunes themselves are always on the move, sculpted by winds that erase yesterday's ridges as they build tomorrow's. The forests you walk through, no matter how ancient they feel, are young in geological time. They rise, they fall to fire or flood, and new ones take their place. Even the continents themselves, the very bones of the planet, are restless rafts drifting on a mantle that slowly churns like thick soup. Given enough time, everything shifts, everything changes. And in that ceaseless transformation, evidence of the past is not preserved but dissolved back into the whole. Now, let's imagine that a civilization, something organized and intelligent, once flourished here long before us. Not just a scattered tribe, not just tool-using animals, but something with structure, cooperation, perhaps even cities. Where would its remains be now? If it lived on the surface, those traces would be the first to vanish. Rain, frost, wind, and roots are endlessly patient. They wear down stone, crack open walls, and return buildings to dust. If it lived near a coastline, the ocean would have swallowed it. Tides and storms grind stone into sand, while shifting sea levels bury whole landscapes under layers of silt. If it left monuments in the desert, sandstorms would eventually cover them. If it carved its memory into mountains, those mountains would crumble into rivers and be carried away as silt to the ocean floor. The Earth does not let things stand forever. It is always rewriting, always rearranging. Consider, for instance, the idea of supercontinents. We often learn in school about Pangaea, that vast landmass where dinosaurs once roamed. But Pangaea was not the first supercontinent. It was only the most recent in a long cycle of merging and breaking that goes back billions of years. Before it, there were others, Rodinia, Nuna, even earlier ones lost to deeper time. Each time the face of the Earth changed completely. Oceans closed, mountains rose taller than the Himalayas, coastlines redrew themselves. And in those transformations, anything left behind by life on the surface would have been ground under, melted in magma, or buried beneath thousands of meters of new rock. Imagine a city as large as ours, swallowed not by centuries but by the very folding of continents. Nothing would remain except perhaps a chemical whisper in the stone. The Earth's atmosphere itself is an eraser. Oxygen is reactive. It rusts metals, fades pigments, weakens stone. A carved statue that looks eternal to us now would be no more than a faint blur of minerals after a few million years of weathering. Rivers, too, are erasers. They carry fragments of mountains and cities alike, scattering them across floodplains before sweeping them into the sea. Volcanic eruptions blanket entire regions in ash and lava, obliterating the surface beneath. Glaciers scrape continents clean, grinding whatever lies in their path into a fine powder that washes away with meltwater. If a civilization rose before the last ice age, much of its world would have been erased when vast ice sheets bulldozed across North America, Europe, and Asia. What is most humbling is how quickly this erasure happens. It does not require billions of years. Archaeologists studying human ruins can tell us that even in a few centuries, neglect can erase astonishing amounts. A wooden house abandoned today would be gone in less than 100 years, swallowed by vegetation and weather. A concrete tower might last a little longer, but cracks would let in water, steel would rust, floors would collapse, and soon it would be a mound of rubble. Even the most enduring stone monuments we know, like the pyramids or the temples of Angkor, require constant maintenance. Without it, they too would eventually vanish. If our entire modern world could disappear in less than 1 million years, it becomes easier to imagine that an older civilization might already have come and gone without leaving anything recognizable behind. Some might ask, what about fossils? Surely if something as significant as a civilization once existed, we would find their remains. But fossils themselves are rare gifts. Out of the countless creatures that have lived on Earth, only a fraction have fossilized, and only a fraction of those have been found. Fossilization requires very specific conditions: rapid burial, the right minerals, the absence of scavengers and erosion. Most life leaves no fossil record at all. The same would be true for a civilization. If its materials decayed too quickly, or were buried in regions that later sank into the mantle, nothing would be left. We walk across fields and forests where thousands of species once lived, and we see no sign of them. Civilizations, too, could vanish in the same way. This forgetfulness of Earth is not cruelty. It is simply the nature of a living, dynamic planet. It does not keep records the way a library does. Instead, it recycles, reuses, reshapes. The same carbon atoms that once built a forest may now drift in the air as carbon dioxide, only to one day form part of a coral reef. The same silicon grains that once stood in a desert dune may now be fused into sandstone, buried deep, and later uplifted into a mountain. Nothing is wasted, but nothing is preserved in its original form either. From our perspective, that looks like erasure. From the planet's perspective, it is just continuity. When you step back and see this, it changes how you think about permanence. Our species has existed for a blink of an eye. We tell ourselves that our skyscrapers, satellites, and roads are indestructible, that our history is secure, but in the rhythms of the Earth we are temporary. Our story is a thin line scratched onto a surface that is already rewriting itself. And if we are temporary, then so might have been others. Perhaps civilizations came before us, lived their span, and were erased not by catastrophe but simply by time's slow and steady hand. Perhaps the reason we find no trace is not because there was nothing, but because the Earth has forgotten. This, then, is the nature of our planet. a place that remembers only briefly before it begins again. Mountains fall, oceans move, climates shift, layers of rock bury the old beneath the new. And in that restless memory, we are left to wonder how many stories have been lost, how many civilizations rose and fell, their traces carried away by wind and wave, their voices muted by stone, their legacies recycled into the bones of continents. We may never know, but perhaps it is enough to sit with the thought that the Earth is older, more patient, and more forgetful than we can imagine, and that within that forgetfulness there is space for many mysteries we will never uncover. Chapter 2. How quickly ruins fade. When we look at ruins scattered across our world today, they appear eternal, as though they have always stood there waiting for us. Stone temples buried in jungles, amphitheatres weathered by centuries of rain, pyramids rising stubbornly against the desert wind. These images give the illusion of permanence. But permanence is a trick of the eye, a trick played on the short span of human memory. If we pause long enough, if we stretch our imagination across thousands or millions of years, the truth reveals itself. Ruins fade quickly, faster than most of us realize, and even the most enduring works of a civilization can vanish almost without a trace. Let's begin small, with something familiar. Imagine a wooden house abandoned on the edge of a forest. For a year or two it remains mostly intact. The walls are still upright, the windows still framed, the roof mostly holding, but seasons begin to gnaw at it. Rain seeps into the wood, sunlight cracks the paint. Insects make their homes inside the beams. Within a decade, the roof begins to sag, shingles scattering across the ground like fallen leaves, vines crawl up the sides, moss covers what used to be steps. Another decade, and the floors rot through. The walls lean until they collapse in storms. The forest reclaims it piece by piece, folding the building back into soil. Within 100 years, almost nothing recognizable is left. The ground holds the memory, but no passerby would guess a house once stood there. Now imagine the same process stretched to stone. We think of stone as unbreakable, yet it too is patient in its surrender. Take a block of granite cut and stacked into a wall. Rain seeps into hairline cracks. Frost widens them. Roots push their way in. Over centuries, edges soften, carvings blur. The wall crumbles into rubble. In another few thousand years, those stones themselves may break down, reduced to gravel, then sand, then soil. Archaeologists today can sometimes read these whispers if they catch them at the right moment, but given enough time, even stone ceases to speak. What we call ruins are just brief pauses in a much longer cycle of forgetting. The cities we build today may look like they will last forever. Steel skyscrapers with glass facades, highways stretched like ribbons across continents, sprawling suburbs, and industrial complexes. Surely these will be visible for millennia, won't they? Yet when we look at abandoned cities already within living memory, we see otherwise. Think of Pripyat, near Chernobyl. In just a few decades, the buildings are already cracking. The streets are forests of trees. Wildlife roams freely through what were once apartment blocks and playgrounds. Think of Detroit, where sections left vacant are slowly being reclaimed by grass, shrubs, and animals. These places remind us that the resilience of human structures depends on constant upkeep. Without it, the world moves quickly to erase them. Scale the clock forward. A few centuries without humans, and bridges collapse into rivers, dams crumble, roads crack open as roots burst through the asphalt. 1,000 years, and forests spread across farmland, cities vanish beneath layers of soil and leaf litter. Earthquakes topple what remains. Coastal towns sink beneath rising seas or get buried in sand. 10,000 years, and only a few stone monuments may survive, weathered into shapes almost unrecognizable from their original design. Imagine someone stumbling upon the eroded stump of a skyscraper pillar. Would they even know it was artificial? Would they be able to tell the difference between that and a natural rock formation? The Earth is not gentle with time. Consider what happened to ancient human works that are only a few thousand years old. The Great Library of Alexandria, one of the most ambitious projects of memory, left no physical trace at all. Entire Mesopotamian cities, once thriving with canals and gardens, are now deserts of broken clay bricks. The Indus Valley civilization, with its carefully planned urban centers, was hidden for thousands of years until modern excavations revealed it. Even then, only fragments remain, and the writing they left is still undeciphered. If these relatively recent civilizations can nearly disappear from our knowledge, what hope would something tens of millions of years old have of recognition? We like to think that monumental structures guarantee remembrance, but even those are fragile. The Sphinx in Egypt, carved from limestone, has been eroded and patched countless times across its long life. Without preservation efforts, it might already have been reduced to rubble. Angkor Wat in Cambodia, reclaimed by the jungle, would have vanished entirely if explorers had not stumbled across it again. Machu Picchu lay hidden for centuries above the Urubamba River, invisible beneath vines and roots, before being revealed. These sites remind us that discovery itself is a matter of luck, timing, and perspective. If chance had not aligned, many of them might still be buried, forgotten. And here is where the imagination stretches further. If our own ruins, spread across a planet in an age of maps, satellites, and archaeology, can nearly vanish in a few thousand years, then how fragile would the ruins of an earlier civilization be? A civilization that perhaps built with wood, or earth, or other materials more fragile than stone. A civilization erased by flood, or volcanic eruption, or shifting seas. Within a million years, the odds of recognition approach zero. Within tens of millions, they vanish entirely. Even our proudest modern constructions, if left alone, would not last long enough to prove we were here. Perhaps far into the future, the only clues of our existence will be microscopic. A line of unusual isotopes, a thin layer of plastic pressed into rock, a sudden chemical spike in the carbon record. It is tempting to picture the Earth as a stage upon which every play leaves its props scattered after the performance. But the Earth is more like a stage crew constantly sweeping, repainting, and resetting the scenery. The props do not stay. The backdrop is not fixed. Every trace of yesterday is swept away so that tomorrow can be prepared. And within that endless cycle of clearing and renewal, ruins are fragile, momentary things. So when we say civilizations leave no trace, we are not only speaking of hypotheticals, we are speaking of truths we can already see in motion. We see them in the ruins we almost lost. We see them in the way our own buildings crumble in decades when abandoned. We see them in the patience of rivers and winds, glaciers and volcanoes, seas that rise and fall like lungs breathing over millennia. Civilization is loud and visible in its moment, but in the long memory of the Earth, it is barely a whisper, and whispers fade quickly. Perhaps this is why the thought lingers that civilizations before us may have existed and vanished without leaving a record we can recognize, not because they were insignificant, but because time itself is merciless. We measure ruins in centuries. The Earth measures them in cycles of continents. And when those cycles turn, nothing of us, or of them, is guaranteed to remain. Chapter 3. The Geological Memory. The Earth does keep memories, but they are not the kind we are used to. They are not neat, organized archives stacked in libraries, nor are they journals with tidy entries for each passing age. Instead, the planet's memories are written in stone, in layers of sediment, in chemical traces that can be read only if you know where to look. This is the geological memory of Earth, a record that is both enduring and fragile, both vast in its scope and full of missing pages. And when you begin to think about lost civilizations, this is where the question becomes most delicate. If there had been others before us, would the geological memory be able to recall them? Or would their story have been swept away, leaving only faint, ambiguous traces folded deep into the Earth's crust? Imagine, first, how a page in this geological book is written. A river carries silt downstream, and as it slows at its mouth, the silt settles. Grain by grain, a layer forms. In time, it may be buried by more silt, compressed into shale. Or a desert wind lays down dunes that, with enough time, are cemented into sandstone. Volcanic ash rains down, hardening into tuff. Coral reefs build themselves up, only to be buried and preserved as limestone. These are the entries in the Book of the Earth. Each layer is a moment in time captured in stone. And yet, unlike our paper books, this one is constantly being revised. Layers are tilted, folded, metamorphosed into new forms. They can be subducted into the mantle, melted and reborn as magma, erased from the record entirely. The Book of Earth is full of erasures and overwrites. Now imagine a civilization living at some distant point in the past. Perhaps it had villages, farms, structures of wood or stone. Perhaps it built on coastlines, near rivers, on fertile plains, the same places we build today. What would be left of it in the geological record? If its tools and buildings decayed, the only hope might be in the sediments themselves. Maybe a sudden flood buried an entire settlement, sealing it under layers of mud. Maybe volcanic ash froze it in time. But even then, millions of years would pass, and those protective layers might themselves be destroyed. What survives is not the thing itself, but a shadow, a chemical clue, a strange concentration of metals, or an unusual spike in carbon. Scientists have thought carefully about this possibility. The Silurian hypothesis, proposed not by fringe theorists but by planetary scientists, asks directly, could an industrial civilization have existed millions of years ago? And if so, what traces would remain? The conclusion is sobering. Direct evidence, artifacts, ruins, bones would almost certainly be gone, but indirect evidence might remain in the geology. Odd isotopes from nuclear reactions, unusual metal concentrations from mining, or chemical fingerprints of large-scale industry. Already, in our own short history, humanity has left such traces. The thin radioactive layer from mid-20th century nuclear testing will persist for millions of years. Plastics are working their way into sediments, where they may fossilize into a kind of hybrid rock sometimes called plastiglomerate. Our burning of fossil fuels has altered the carbon isotope balance in the atmosphere, a shift that will be detectable in geological cores far into the future. These are the signatures we leave behind. But they are subtle, and if another species were to examine them tens of millions of years from now, they might debate endlessly whether the signals were artificial or natural. The Earth's memory, then, is ambiguous. It records, but it does not explain. A geologist might look at a thin line of iridium in a layer of clay and argue it is the result of an asteroid impact, as with the event that ended the age of the dinosaurs. But could such a layer ever be mistaken for the work of a civilization? Could what we think of as natural anomalies actually be artifacts? The unsettling truth is that it is difficult to be certain. Our assumptions frame the way we interpret the record. We look for natural causes because we assume we are the only civilization the Earth has hosted. But what if that assumption blinds us to other possibilities? It is worth remembering how limited our view is. The geological record we can actually study is a fraction of the Earth's history. Rocks older than about 2 billion years are rare. Many have been destroyed, melted, or recycled into new forms. Entire chapters of Earth's early history are missing. Even in younger rocks, the record is patchy. Fossil beds are scattered, incomplete, heavily biased toward creatures with hard parts and environments that favor preservation. For every fossil we find, countless others never formed or were lost. Civilizations, if they were fragile or short-lived, would leave even fainter marks than organisms. There is also the issue of scale. A layer of plastic in modern sediments is clear to us because we know what plastic is, but to someone examining the same rock millions of years later, it may look like nothing more than an unusual conglomerate. The isotope shifts we see today may look like a natural anomaly later, just as we now interpret other anomalies in ancient rocks as volcanic or cosmic events. The Earth's memory is not written with explanations, only with traces. Interpreting those traces depends on context, on imagination, and on what questions we are willing to ask. And so, when we think about civilizations that left no trace, we must expand our idea of what a trace is. It may not be walls or roads or pottery. It may not be tools or statues. It may be a line of carbon, a streak of metal, a curious mineral composition in a cliff face. It may be something we have already catalogued as unusual but natural, because it never occurred to us to consider another possibility. This is not to suggest conspiracies or hidden histories, but to acknowledge the humility that comes with studying a planet so ancient and dynamic. The truth is that we do not know all the ways intelligence might leave its mark, nor all the ways the Earth might disguise those marks as natural. The geological memory of Earth is both generous and merciless. Generous because it does keep something, however faint, from almost every age. Merciless because it keeps so little in recognizable form. It does not preserve in the way human memory longs for. It preserves as stone, as chemistry, as subtle signals that can be read only with care and imagination. When we walk through canyons, when we hold fossils, When we look at the stripes of colour in a cliff face, we are seeing fragments of that memory. But for every fragment, there are countless others that have been erased, rewritten, lost to time. This, perhaps, is why the idea of lost civilizations lingers. It is not that we have evidence of them, but that the gaps in Earth's memory are so vast that the absence of evidence does not feel like proof of absence. The Earth is old, older than we can easily grasp. Its memory is imperfect, partial, selective. And in those blank spaces, in those missing pages, our imaginations wander. What might have lived there? What might have built, dreamed, vanished? We cannot say. All we can do is acknowledge that the Earth's geological memory is not complete, and within its silences, anything is possible. Chapter 4. The Silence of Archaeology. When we think of archaeology, we imagine careful hands brushing dust from artifacts, stone walls rising from the soil, and lost cities slowly emerging into the light after millennia underground. Archaeology feels like a kind of magic, a discipline that can give voice to the past. Yet archaeology is also bound by silence. It can only recover what has managed to survive, and survival is rare. Most of the past has not endured. Most of the stories that were once alive on this planet have been erased, leaving gaps far larger than the fragments we study. And when we wonder whether ancient civilizations might have left no trace, this silence of archaeology becomes the most haunting part of the question. Our own human record is astonishingly shallow. Written language, one of our most powerful tools of preservation, is barely 5,000 years old. Before that, there are no books, no inscriptions, only artifacts and architecture. The oldest surviving human structures, such as Göbekli Tepe, are 12,000 years old at most. That sounds ancient, but on the scale of Earth's history it is a blink, not even a second on the clock. Civilizations older than this, if they existed, would fall into a silence archaeology cannot penetrate. The soil does not speak that far back, not in the way we expect. Even within the range we can study, the record is patchy. The Indus Valley civilization, once home to tens of thousands of people in cities carefully designed with plumbing and drainage, left behind no deciphered writing. We know it existed, but we do not know what its people called themselves, what they believed, or why their culture declined. All of that has been lost to silence. The Maya, whose glyphs we can now read, left monuments swallowed by jungle. Entire cities were hidden beneath roots and soil until the 20th century. If those same sites had been buried a little longer, perhaps by a shifting river or a landslide, they might never have been found at all. For every lost city we rediscover, countless others may remain buried beyond reach. There is also the silence imposed by water. Many of humanity's earliest settlements were coastal, near rivers and deltas. These are the most fertile lands, rich with resources. But coastlines are not fixed. Over the past 20,000 years, since the end of the last ice age, sea levels have risen more than 100 meters. Entire regions of land, once plains where people lived and hunted, are now beneath the waves. Doggerland, the land bridge that once connected Britain to Europe, supported human life. Today, it is the floor of the North Sea. The Black Sea once expanded dramatically, drowning coastlines. Archaeologists know that beneath the ocean lie untold ruins and artifacts, but most remain inaccessible. The sea has silenced them, and if this is true for structures only a few thousand years old, how much more silence would cover something millions of years older? Even deserts hide their own silences. Sand covers ruins swiftly, preserving some but concealing many. The city of Ubar, long thought to be a myth, was eventually identified beneath Arabian sands. But countless other sites remain undiscovered, buried deeper, indistinguishable from natural dunes. Forests, too, erase. A jungle can consume stone in a matter of decades, roots prying apart walls, moss softening edges, vines pulling down beams. When left long enough, the jungle returns the land to nature, leaving only ambiguous shapes that may never be uncovered. If archaeology struggles even with the most recent 12,000 years, what does that say about the millions upon millions of years before us? The methods of the field rely on material survival. Pottery shards, stone tools, bones hardened into fossils. But what if a civilization did not use stone or fire? What if its materials were fragile wood, plant fibers, shells? What if its technology left chemical rather than physical marks? Our archaeologists, trained to look for certain kinds of evidence, might not recognize the signs even if they stood before them. Archaeology is limited not only by silence but by expectation. We expect civilizations to look like ours. We expect ruins of stone and metal, pottery and writing. If a civilization took another form entirely, we might not even know how to begin searching for it. It is humbling to realize how much of human history itself has already slipped into silence. Of all the people who have ever lived, only a fraction left any record we can study. The lives of hunter-gatherers, the beliefs of small tribes, the stories told around fires for tens of thousands of years, these are gone. We know they existed only in the vaguest outlines. Their artifacts are scattered, their voices lost. The deeper we go, the thinner the record becomes, until it vanishes altogether. Archaeology is less like reading a book, and more like piecing together scraps of paper from a bonfire. We see fragments, but the vast majority is gone. This silence should remind us of humility. When we say confidently that no civilizations existed before humans, what we are really saying is that archaeology has found no trace. But archaeology works only with what is left, and what is left is already vanishingly small. It cannot prove absence. It can only prove presence. The silence between artifacts is vast enough to contain almost anything, and so we return to the haunting possibility. If another civilization rose millions of years ago, perhaps brief, perhaps fragile, what hope would we have of ever finding it? The ruins would be gone, ground down, recycled into stone, buried in the sea, erased by glaciers, melted by magma. The tools would be dust, the bones would be gone. Archaeology would have nothing to uncover. All that would remain is silence, the kind of silence the earth holds so deeply that it feels as if nothing was ever there. Yet silence itself is not proof of emptiness. It is only the absence of what we know how to see. Perhaps archaeology is like listening to a song with most of the notes missing. We can hear only faint echoes, scattered rhythms, fragments of melody, and in that unfinished music, we fill in the gaps with imagination. Did other verses exist, once sung but now forgotten? Did entire stanzas of history vanish between the notes we can hear? We cannot say for certain, but the silence leaves room to wonder. That is the gift and the unease of archaeology. It shows us both the presence of the past and the immensity of what has been lost. For every artifact held in a museum, there are billions more that never survived. For every city uncovered, there are thousands buried too deep or too completely destroyed to ever be found. The silence is not empty, it is simply unreadable, and in that unreadable space, there is room for possibilities we may never confirm. So as we listen to the silence of archaeology, perhaps the most important thing is not to chase certainty but to accept humility. We are not the masters of history, but the readers of fragments. The earth does not keep its records for us. It keeps them in stone and soil, in ways we can only partially interpret. And in the spaces between, in the vast stretches where no trace remains, we are left with questions. Could others have lived, built, dreamed, and vanished long before us? The silence does not answer. It only invites us to imagine. Chapter 5. The Silurian Hypothesis. Every so often, a question emerges from the quiet corners of science that feels less like a conclusion and more like an invitation to wonder. The Silurian Hypothesis is one such question. It was proposed not by storytellers or fringe dreamers, but by scientists, serious researchers who study planets, climates, and the deep record of Earth's history. Their thought experiment was simple and disarming. If an industrial civilization had risen on Earth millions of years before humans, could we detect it today? The answer was unsettling, because after careful consideration the conclusion was, perhaps not. To understand this, imagine the vastness of Earth's timeline. Our planet is around 4.5 billion years old. Multicellular life has been here for over 500 million years. Dinosaurs roamed the Earth for nearly 200 million years before vanishing in a sudden catastrophe. By comparison, modern humans have existed for only a few 100,000 years, and our industrial civilization is barely 2 centuries old. When you place our story on that scale, it shrinks to invisibility. It is like a single candle flickering for a second in a night that has lasted for eons. If other candles burned long before ours, how would we know? The Silurian hypothesis takes its name from a playful reference to science fiction. In the British television show Doctor Who, the Silurians were imagined as a race of intelligent reptiles who lived on Earth long before humans, retreating underground to escape catastrophe. The hypothesis does not claim such beings existed, but it borrows the idea to pose a real scientific challenge. What would be left of an earlier civilization, and would we be able to recognize it if it were there? The problem begins with time itself. Archaeology, as we practice it, works within thousands of years. The ruins of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, or the Indus Valley feel unimaginably old to us, but they are recent on geological scales. Beyond about 50,000 years, even the best preserved human artifacts become scarce. Beyond a few million years, direct evidence, tools, bones, buildings vanishes entirely. Rocks recycle, layers fold, sediments dissolve. Anything that once stood on the surface is erased. So the scientists behind the Silurian hypothesis asked, what indirect signs might survive? If we cannot find the objects themselves, could we find their shadows in the chemistry of the Earth? This is where things become both eerie and fascinating. Consider what our own civilization has already done in its short span. We have burned fossil fuels at such a scale that the carbon isotope balance of the atmosphere has shifted a signal strong enough to be detectable in future geological cores. We have created synthetic compounds, from plastics to pesticides, that never existed in nature. These substances are now embedded in sediments, forming new layers of hybrid rocks. We have released radioactive isotopes through nuclear testing, leaving a faint but measurable trace that will persist for millions of years. Even if all our cities and technologies vanished tomorrow, these chemical fingerprints would remain. The Silurian hypothesis suggests that if a past civilization reached an industrial stage, it too might have altered the chemistry of its world. Perhaps it burned fuels, releasing carbon in ways that now appear as ancient climate shifts. Perhaps it mined metals, leaving behind concentrations in odd places. Perhaps it invented materials that no longer exist but whose breakdown left unusual residues. To us, those signals might look natural, the way we interpret ancient warming events or sudden spikes in carbon dioxide as purely geological. But what if some of them were not natural? What if, buried in the record, we are already looking at the fingerprints of something forgotten? This is not to say that we have proof of such civilizations. The scientists themselves were careful to emphasize that there is no evidence of prior industrial life. The point of the hypothesis was not to claim discovery, but to highlight how fragile evidence is and how easily it could disappear. It was a way of asking us to be cautious about assuming that what we see is all there is. The absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. Sometimes it is simply the result of a memory too faint to be heard. The most striking implication of the Silurian hypothesis is not that other civilizations did exist, but that if they had, we might struggle to distinguish their traces from natural events. Take the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, a period around 56 million years ago, when Earth's climate suddenly warmed, and carbon levels in the atmosphere spiked dramatically. Scientists explain it with volcanic activity, methane releases, or other natural processes. But the Silurian hypothesis asks, could an industrial civilization have caused it? Not because we believe that is the answer, but because it demonstrates how similar natural and artificial signals might look after millions of years. The thought is both sobering and liberating. It reminds us how small our window into the past truly is. This kind of speculation also extends beyond Earth. If we search for civilizations on other planets, what signs will we look for? We cannot expect to find ruins on distant worlds, at least not easily. But we can look for chemical anomalies, isotopes, atmospheric changes. The Silurian hypothesis shows us that these are the same kinds of signs we ourselves are leaving behind. In a way, by imagining forgotten civilizations on Earth, we practice how to recognize civilizations elsewhere. The shadows we might one day detect on another planet could be very much like the ones we ourselves are creating here. There is something humbling in this perspective. We often think of ourselves as unique, as the first and only species to reach this stage. But what if we are not the first? What if the story of Earth has included other experiments in intelligence, other attempts at industry long since erased? Or what if we are the first but not the last, only one chapter in a much longer book? Either way, the Silurian hypothesis encourages us to see ourselves not as inevitable, but as contingent, fragile, temporary. It reminds us that Earth's memory is not generous, and that even our grandest accomplishments will one day fade into ambiguity. In the end, the Silurian hypothesis is less about proving the existence of ancient civilizations and more about widening our imagination. It teaches us to look at the geological record not just as a story of rocks and climates, but as a canvas where both nature and intelligence might leave their marks. It asks us to read more carefully, to consider what we might be missing, to recognize the silences as well as the signals. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches us humility, the understanding that even if we believe ourselves to be permanent, we too will one day be part of the faint, uncertain record left in stone. So the next time you see a cliff face with stripes of sediment running through it, pause for a moment. Those lines are pages of Earth's memory, written over millions of years. They tell of rivers and deserts, of seas rising and falling, of forests spreading and vanishing. And perhaps, hidden in their chemistry, they might also carry stories we will never fully know. Stories of civilizations that came before, whispered into silence by the turning of time. Chapter 6. Civilizations without stone. When we picture civilization, our minds instinctively turn to stone. We think of pyramids rising against desert skies, temples etched with glyphs, amphitheaters carved into hillsides. Stone feels eternal, the material that outlasts ages, the one sure way to leave a mark upon history. But what if the first civilizations never touched stone at all? What if they built their worlds from softer, more fragile materials, wood, clay, bone, fiber, things meant to endure for decades but not for eons? If that were the case, then the Earth could have hosted entire civilizations, complete with culture, technology and memory, that have left nothing for us to find. To see how quickly this silence could occur, consider the materials of our own lives. Most of what we surround ourselves with is not stone. It is plastic, wood, fabric, paper, metals that rust, electronics that corrode. Walk through a modern city, and while the skyline bristles with steel and glass, the interiors are filled with fragile things, furniture, wiring, textiles, food, tools, toys. If our civilization vanished today, within a few centuries nearly all of that would be gone. Wood rots, paper disintegrates, metals oxidize, plastics break down into microfragments carried by wind and water. Even steel girders, proud in their moment, eventually succumb to rust, crumbling into powder. It is only the rarest of artifacts that could survive long enough to reach into geological time, and even those would be scattered, fragmentary, ambiguous. Now imagine a civilization that never worked stone into monuments at all. Perhaps it lived deep in forests, building from timber, woven fibre, animal hides, or clay-shaped and dried in the sunday. Perhaps it made tools from bone and wood, ornaments from shells, dwellings of earth packed into walls. For us, these materials feel humble, even primitive, but to a people who mastered them, they could form the basis of rich, complex societies. Wooden temples could soar high, timber bridges could span rivers, ships of planks and rope could cross oceans. Their artistry might have rivaled ours, their stories carved into wood or painted onto bark. And yet, a single century of abandonment would erase most of it. Forests would consume the structures, termites would feast, fungi would spread, rain would reduce clay to mud. Within 1,000 years, the memory of that civilization would vanish completely. We have glimpses of this fragility in our own history. The Mayan civilization built great stone temples, but much of their life was woven into wood and plaster, which has long since decayed. The Norse in Greenland left traces of stone foundations, but their wooden halls are gone. In North America, entire cultures thrived in wooden structures, their towns and ceremonial sites now little more than stains in the soil. The Mississippian culture at Cahokia built mounds that still rise from the land, but their wooden palisades and houses have disappeared. These examples are not millions of years old. They're only centuries gone, and yet already their voices are faint. Think also of the written word. Papyrus, parchment, bark, paper, all of these are fragile. Unless carefully preserved in rare conditions, they crumble in mere centuries. The Dead Sea Scrolls survived only because they were hidden in caves with an unusually dry climate. Countless other texts from the ancient world have vanished because the medium itself could not last. Even today, digital records are fragile, dependent on machines and electricity. If power were lost, our archives would be unreadable within decades. If another species looked for traces of us 1,000,000 years from now, they would not find our libraries. They would not find our stories. They would find, at best, the faintest echoes of our presence in stone and sediment. Now extend that thought to a hypothetical civilization millions of years before us. Suppose they never reached for stone at all. Suppose their architecture was organic, their tools biodegradable, their records written on materials as fragile as leaves. From their perspective, perhaps permanence was not even a concern. Perhaps their sense of time did not require monuments because their culture valued renewal over endurance. Perhaps their lives were measured in cycles of seasons, not centuries. For them, building in wood and fibre might have been as natural as breathing, but for us, searching so far into the past, it means their existence would be invisible. The earth would have swallowed their story without a trace. There is something poignant about this possibility. We tend to equate permanence with significance, as though what does not last was never meaningful. Yet civilizations made of fragile things could have been as real, as vibrant, as profound as ours. They may have sung songs, told myths, raised children, mourned their dead, invented tools, traded goods, mapped stars. They may have looked at the same moon we see and felt the same wonder. But the materials they chose to build with, or were limited to, may have guaranteed that nothing of them would survive the long passage of time. We already know that human cultures without stone have slipped into invisibility. Entire lifeways left almost no trace beyond scattered bones or hearths. The Polynesians, who mastered the Pacific with wooden canoes, left no monuments in the open ocean. Their memory lives only in oral tradition. Many hunter-gatherer societies built shelters that disappeared each season, leaving behind almost nothing for archaeologists to study. If these examples, only centuries or millennia gone, are so hard to reconstruct, how much harder would it be to detect civilizations 10 million years in the past that never carved stone or shaped metal? The silence they leave is not evidence that they never existed. It is evidence of the fragility of memory. We think of ruins as the proof of civilization, but ruins themselves are the exception, not the rule. Most of what we build, most of what we value, most of what defines our daily lives is destined to vanish. Only a handful of stones, scattered and weathered, will endure long enough to be noticed by the future. And if a civilization chose or was forced to live without stone, then none of it would endure. There is a quiet comfort in this reflection. It reminds us that significance is not the same as permanence. The worth of a culture does not depend on whether its ruins last for others to find. What matters is that it lived, that it filled its moment with meaning. If lost civilizations of wood and fibre once existed, their memory may be gone, but their presence is still part of the great story of Earth, woven into the cycles of life that continue today. Even if the Earth does not remember them in stone, it remembers them in the soil, in the continuity of life, in the way it keeps moving forward. So when we imagine civilizations without stone, we are not imagining impossibilities. We are acknowledging how fragile memory is, and how much could be hidden in the silence of deep time. It is a reminder that history is not only what is preserved, but also what is lost. And perhaps, somewhere in the Earth's long-forgotten seasons, entire civilizations rose, flourished, and faded, leaving no more trace than a forest consumed by fire or a river that changed its course. We will never see them, but that does not mean they were never there. Chapter 7. Lost in the Sea. When we imagine lost civilizations, we often picture ruins buried under sand or swallowed by jungle, waiting patiently to be uncovered. Yet perhaps the most powerful eraser of all is not sand or forest, but the sea. More than 70% of Earth's surface is covered by water, and the sea is never still. It rises and falls with the tides of climate, erodes coastlines, swallows plains, and drowns entire regions of land. If civilizations once thrived in those drowned landscapes, their memory may lie silent beneath the waves, unreachable and invisible. To wonder whether Earth's first civilizations left no trace is also to wonder how much of the world they may have lost to the sea. The sea level we know today is not a permanent measure. It is only the current pause in a restless cycle. During the last ice age, just 20,000 years ago, so much water was locked in glaciers that oceans stood over 100 meters lower than they do now. Vast plains connected islands and continents. Land bridges stretched across what are now seas. Doggerland, for instance, once connected Britain to mainland Europe, supporting hunters and gatherers who lived where waves now roll. Sunderland, a massive extension of Southeast Asia, was home to forests and rivers before it was drowned by the rising waters. These are not places lost in deep time. They are recent enough that human cultures once walked them, and yet they are now gone, hidden beneath currents and sediments. If that is what happened in just the last few thousand years, what might have been erased in millions? Coastlines are among the most attractive places for civilizations to arise. They offer food from both land and sea, fertile soil, and routes for travel and trade. It is no surprise that most of humanity's great cities sit near rivers or oceans, but this very preference makes civilizations fragile. A rise in sea level, a shift in shoreline, a single flood, and whole settlements can vanish. If earlier civilizations favoured coasts as we do, their remains may now be lying under layers of mud on the seabed, buried so deep that our archaeology cannot reach them. Think of the way the ocean erases. Waves batter stone until it breaks into sand. Storms drag debris far out into the deeps. Currents shift sediments constantly, covering and uncovering the seafloor. In shallow waters, wood and organic matter rot quickly. In deeper waters, pressures and chemical reactions dissolve and transform what sinks there. A wooden shipwreck can last for a few centuries if buried in mud, but left exposed it disintegrates rapidly. A city swallowed by the sea might last as outlines for a time, but within thousands of years it would be erased, its stones scattered, its structures dissolved. Millions of years would obliterate all but the faintest geological clues, indistinguishable from natural formations. Even in modern times, we have only begun to explore the seafloor. The deep ocean is one of the least mapped parts of our planet, more mysterious than the surface of Mars. What we know comes mostly from coastlines and shallow waters. In rare cases, ruins have been found beneath the waves, stone walls off the coast of Yonaguni in Japan, drowned structures near India's Gulf of Khambhat, ancient ports submerged along the Mediterranean. These sites, however debated, remind us that the sea has already taken much of human history. If we are still discovering cities only a few thousand years old beneath shallow waters, what of the deeper past that lies far below the reach of sunlight, covered by endless sediments? The ocean floor is also a place of burial. Rivers carry soil and silt into the sea, where it settles layer upon layer over centuries. Anything caught in those deposits is quickly hidden from sight. The weight of sediments presses down, compressing, transforming. A city swallowed by such processes would not survive as ruins. It would survive, perhaps, only as a strange layer in the rock record, a concentration of materials that might puzzle a future geologist but not shout its origin. We might already have drilled through such layers without realizing what we touched. And there is another thought, quieter and stranger. What if civilizations themselves once adapted to the sea, not merely along its coasts but within it, building floating cities or even submerging into its depths? Human cultures today still live closely with the water, building houses on stilts, crafting boats that serve as entire homes. Polynesians crossed the vast Pacific in canoes, guided only by stars and swells. If humans could do this, why not others before us, perhaps in ages long past? Their legacy would be even more fragile than ours, for water consumes without mercy. A society that left its memory floating on waves or anchored in shallow seas would be erased in less than a geological blink. It is worth remembering how easily even recent stories vanish beneath water. In 1908, the town of Villa Epicuén in Argentina was flooded, submerged for decades. When waters receded, its ruins emerged ghostly and skeletal, crumbling as they dried. And that was less than a century. Entire coastlines from ancient times now lie forgotten under seas. In another few thousand years, those ruins too will dissolve, leaving only speculation about who lived there. Scale that process to millions of years, and the silence becomes almost complete. The ocean is beautiful, but it is also restless. It is not a gentle keeper of history. It is a constant reshaper, covering, eroding, recycling. Its floor is a graveyard of worlds we cannot see. Its depths are silence so deep we can barely touch it. If civilizations rose and fell long before us, if they built their lives close to coasts as we do, then most of their story now lies hidden beneath the waves. Not gone perhaps, but erased from human reach. Their traces, if any remain, are scattered fragments buried under kilometers of water and sediment, indistinguishable from the Earth's own processes. And so, when we ask whether Earth's first civilizations left no trace, we must always turn our gaze toward the sea, for it is there, in the shifting margins where land meets water, that so many lives were lived and so many memories were lost. The silence of the ocean is not empty. It is heavy, filled with stories we can no longer hear. To wonder about them is to stand on a shoreline, watching the horizon, knowing that beneath the waves lie worlds erased but not forgotten by the planet itself. The sea remembers in its own way, though it keeps those memories hidden, carried in its depths, whispered in currents we cannot follow. Chapter 8. Underground Echoes. If the surface of the Earth is a restless stage, constantly rewritten by wind and water, perhaps the first civilizations chose a different direction entirely. Instead of building upward into the light, maybe they built downward, sinking their homes and temples into the embrace of stone. The idea of underground civilizations is not only the territory of myth, it also reflects a practical truth. The underground is stable, shielded from storms and fires, hidden from predators and enemies, insulated against heat and cold. It is quiet, patient, and enduring. And yet, paradoxically, it is also one of the easiest places for traces to vanish. If the Earth once held entire worlds beneath its skin, those echoes may now be sealed forever in chambers we will never see. When you picture stepping into a cave, you can feel how different it is from the surface. The air cools immediately, carrying the damp scent of stone. Sounds stretch and echo, giving every footstep a strange weight. Light becomes precious, flickering on walls that glimmer with minerals. To ancient humans, caves were not simply shelters, they were portals into another world. We know this because they painted there herds of animals, handprints, symbols whose meanings are lost. These acts suggest reverence, a sense of importance that went beyond survival. If early humans felt this way, might not earlier civilizations, if they existed, have taken the underground as their true home? History gives us glimpses of what underground life could mean. In Cappadocia, in present-day Turkey, vast subterranean cities were carved into volcanic rock. They contained homes, stables, chapels, wells, and passages large enough to hold thousands of people. In Iran, ancient qanat systems carried water for miles beneath deserts, creating hidden networks of tunnels. In Malta, the Hal Saflieni hypogeum shows that entire ceremonial complexes could be built underground, with chambers carved so precisely that their acoustics amplify human voices in haunting ways. None of these places are as old as the question we are asking, but they show us that underground living is not only possible but attractive. If it was possible a few thousand years ago, why not tens of millions of years ago? The advantages of underground life are obvious. Weather is no longer a threat. Temperatures remain stable throughout the year. Resources such as water can be stored safely. Hidden beneath the surface, communities could survive without drawing the attention of predators or perhaps rivals. To a fragile, developing civilization, the underground might not have been an emergency shelter but the most sensible foundation for survival. Generations raised beneath stone would find it natural, even comforting, to live without a sky. But here is where the paradox deepens. For all its stability, the underground does not preserve in ways we expect. Tunnels collapse, chambers flood, sediments settle, sealing entrances forever. Over time, geological processes erase the artificial signatures, blending them into natural formations. A collapsed cavern looks, to us, like nothing more than a natural sinkhole. A tunnel filled with silt becomes indistinguishable from veins of softer rock. Even the walls carved by human or other hands, if left long enough, weather into shapes that mimic natural fissures. The underground, in other words, can hide as much as it reveals. Myths across cultures have long whispered about hidden worlds below. The Greeks told of Hades, a vast subterranean realm. Tibetan and Hindu legends spoke of Shambhala and Agartha, mystical kingdoms hidden beneath mountains. Native American stories mentioned beings emerging from underground places, returning below when their work was done. Perhaps these are only symbolic tales, metaphors for death and rebirth, or allegories for inner journeys. But perhaps they also carry faint echoes of something else. A collective memory of life beneath the surface, carried across ages in myth rather than stone. Science, too, feeds this possibility. Modern explorations of deep caves continually reveal life where none was expected. Entire ecosystems thrive in perpetual darkness, from eyeless fish to bacteria that feed not on sunlight but on the chemical energy of rocks. If life can flourish underground without light, then so could a civilization, at least for a time. Fungi could provide food. Streams flowing through caverns could supply water. Fire could give light and warmth. An entire culture could shape itself around these constraints, learning to see stone not as confinement but as home. But if such civilizations once existed, why do we not find their traces? Part of the answer lies in how little of the underground we have actually explored. The cave systems we know, Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, the vast karst systems in China, the deep networks in Europe, are only the barest fraction of what lies below. Vast portions of the Earth's crust remain uncharted, unreachable with current tools. To find a buried civilization in that immensity would be like searching for a single grain of sand on an endless shore. Another part of the answer is time. Even stone does not last forever. Underground chambers collapse under their own weight. Floodwaters carve new passages, burying the old. Lava flows and tectonic shifts obliterate entire regions. After a few thousand years, an underground city might still be recognizable. After a few million, it would be erased. If civilizations before us lived in this way, their homes might already be sealed within stone, crushed into geology, erased from recognition. And yet, the thought lingers. Imagine a child born underground, whose entire life was spent beneath stone. To that child, the ceiling would feel like safety, the walls like protection. The surface would seem strange, exposed, even frightening. Their myths might not speak of gods above, but of dangers waiting in the open sky. Their dreams would be of tunnels and chambers, lit by fire, resonant with song and voice. If they had written their stories on walls, perhaps those words are still there, buried too deep for us ever to uncover. To wonder about underground civilizations is to sit with the possibility that Earth holds echoes we cannot hear. The surface is noisy, full of ruins and monuments, but the underground is silent. It swallows sound, it swallows light, and it swallows memory. It does not keep its stories for us, and yet, for a time, it may have sheltered them, carried them, given them life. If the Earth's first civilizations chose to live this way, then their traces would now be echoes within echoes, whispers sealed in chambers we will never reach. In the end, we may never know if such civilizations existed, but their possibility widens our imagination. It teaches us that permanence is not necessary for significance, and that silence does not always mean absence. The underground is a world we barely touch, and within its shadows there may lie stories older than we can fathom, stories written not in stone, monuments that rise to the sky, but in chambers and corridors that have long since fallen back into the earth itself. Chapter 9. Forest Empires. When we imagine the great civilizations of the past, we picture stone rising against the sky, pyramids, temples, walls, and palaces that resist the pull of time. Yet most of Earth's surface has never been dominated by stone deserts or open plains. For much of history, and even more so in deep prehistory, vast forests blanketed the land. From towering conifers in the age of the dinosaurs to endless canopies of oaks, beeches, and tropical trees in later epochs, forests have been the dominant stage for life on Earth. And so, when we ask whether ancient civilizations might have existed and left no trace, we must turn our eyes to the forests. For if there were empires of wood and vine, woven into the breathing fabric of these green worlds, the Earth would have erased them almost completely. Step into a forest, and you can feel its power to consume. The air is damp, alive with scents of soil and decay. Fallen branches soften quickly into sponges of moss. Logs become homes for beetles and fungi. Leaves collapse into the humus that feeds new growth. Nothing is wasted here, but nothing endures in its original form either. Wood rots swiftly, fibers unravel, bark disintegrates. A structure built entirely of timber and thatch, no matter how grand, would last only a short while if abandoned. A palace could dissolve into forest floor in less than a century, leaving little but a rise in the ground, a faint discoloration in the soil. Multiply this over millennia, and the memory vanishes. We see hints of this fragility in human history. In the rainforests of Central America, the stone pyramids of the Maya still rise above the trees, but the wooden homes, bridges, and painted panels of that civilization are long gone. What remains is only the most durable stone, stripped of colour, stripped of the life that once filled it. In northern Europe, wooden fortresses and halls once stood tall, but today they survive only as dark stains in the soil where post holes once were. Archaeologists recognise these marks only with trained eyes, and even then, interpretation is uncertain. Forests reclaim with relentless patience, digesting wood into earth until even the memory of construction fades. Now imagine civilizations that never turned to stone at all. Imagine people or beings of some kind who found in wood all the strength and flexibility they needed. Their temples carved from giant trunks, their bridges woven from living vines, their homes raised on stilts above forest floors. To them, permanence may not have been measured in centuries but in seasons. Perhaps they rebuilt with each generation, tearing down and raising anew. Perhaps they preferred the living to the lifeless, shaping trees themselves into dwellings rather than cutting them down. Their legacy would not be ruins but forests altered in ways that, millions of years later, would be indistinguishable from natural growth. Even in our world, the forest holds secrets. In the Amazon, aerial surveys reveal faint geometric earthworks beneath the trees, ditches, and mounds that once marked settlements or ceremonial spaces. For centuries no one knew they were there, because the forest swallowed them. In Cambodia, entire cities of the Khmer Empire lay hidden beneath jungle, until laser mapping revealed their outlines. And these are civilizations only a few centuries gone, with remnants made partly of stone. Without those stone fragments, we might never have known they existed. A civilization built entirely of forest materials, erased long before humans, would leave even less behind. Forests themselves shift and change. Trees grow, fall, and are replaced. Rivers alter their courses, flooding valleys, depositing sediments. Fires sweep through, clearing vast tracts before regrowth begins again. Within a few thousand years, an entire forested landscape can be remade several times over. Within millions, the land may be uplifted, eroded, drowned, or transformed into something else entirely. Any signs of life once built there would dissolve into soil, buried beyond recognition. The forest remembers only through cycles, not through ruins. There is something humbling in this. We often think of civilizations as defined by their endurance, by the stone they leave behind. But what if the first civilizations measured themselves instead by harmony with their environment? What if their goal was not permanence but integration, building with the forest rather than against it? They might have lived in balance with cycles of growth and decay, seeing impermanence not as loss but as renewal. Such civilizations would be invisible to us, and yet invisibility does not mean absence. It only means their memory is carried in ways we cannot read in soil enriched by generations, in subtle shifts to landscapes long since remade. When we walk through forests today, we rarely think of them as places of history. They feel eternal, timeless, always growing, always renewing. Yet beneath our feet lie layers of soil that may once have been homes, marketplaces, and meeting grounds. Perhaps the ground remembers in ways we cannot perceive. A strange pattern in root growth, a faint discoloration in sediment layers. These could be all that is left of empires whose people once laughed, worked, and dreamed beneath the same canopy we now see. This is where the imagination stretches beyond evidence. Could the first civilizations have been forest civilizations, leaving no monuments because their monuments were alive? Could their cathedrals have been groves, their walls grown rather than built, their memory carried not in stone inscriptions but in songs and traditions that vanished with them? If so, then perhaps Earth has hosted empires we will never recognize. Empires that passed as lightly as wind through leaves, empires that dissolved back into soil with no resistance. The silence of the forest is not empty. It is filled with the sounds of life, with the slow work of decay and renewal. But it does not tell us stories the way ruins do. It does not preserve. It transforms. And in that transformation, civilizations made of forest materials would have been erased without a trace. Their empires may still echo faintly in myths, in our instinctive fascination with hidden worlds and lost golden ages. But in the soil and the stone, there is nothing left to find. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of imagining forest empires, that meaning is not tied to permanence. A life, a culture, a civilization can be real and rich and powerful even if it leaves nothing behind. The forest teaches us that what matters is not endurance but participation, being part of the cycle of growth and decay. And so, even if the first civilizations of Earth lived and died in forests, leaving no monuments for us to uncover, their presence may still live in the rhythm of the planet itself. They may be gone, but their silence invites us to listen more closely to the stories the Earth does not tell. Chapter 10. Civilizations of Ice. When we picture ancient civilizations, we often think of warm valleys, fertile plains, and temperate coasts. Yet for much of Earth's history, the climate has not been gentle or mild. Ice has advanced and retreated many times, sculpting continents, swallowing land, and locking away oceans in frozen sheets. Entire ages of the Earth were dominated by glaciers, by storms of snow and wind, by landscapes where warmth was scarce, and survival itself seemed fragile. And so we must ask, if civilizations ever arose long before us, could some of them have been civilizations of ice? Could there have been worlds built not in stone or wood, but in frost and frozen water worlds that disappeared the moment the climate shifted, leaving no trace at all? Imagine walking into an ancient glacial plain. Towering walls of ice stretch across the horizon, their faces blue and fractured, glowing softly in the pale light of the sunday. The air is sharp, dry, every breath crystallizing in the lungs. Beneath the ice, rivers of meltwater rush silently, carving tunnels and chambers that collapse and reform. It is a landscape constantly shifting, alive in its own slow way. To us, this environment feels harsh, even hostile, but perhaps to others, creatures adapted to it. Beings who understood how to live with its cycles, it could have been home. We know that humans, in our brief history, adapted to icy worlds. Our ancestors survived ice ages with little more than fire, clothing, and determination. They built shelters of bone and hide, carved tools from stone and ivory, and learned to read the movements of glaciers and herds. If we could do this without industry, then it is not hard to imagine that another civilization, given more time and knowledge, could have thrived in such conditions. Perhaps they used ice itself as their medium, carving halls and fortresses from frozen walls. Perhaps they domesticated cold, creating ways to preserve food and light within this frigid environment. Perhaps their art was etched into ice, their songs carried by winds across frozen seas. The challenge, of course, is preservation. Ice is not a lasting medium. It shifts, melts, and reforms constantly. A palace carved into a glacier might stand for centuries, but as soon as the climate warms, it would vanish without a trace. Even tools and artifacts left behind would be destroyed by thawing, washed into rivers, and carried into seas. A civilization of ice would leave no stone monuments, no wooden relics, no pottery or tablets. Its memory would dissolve along with the ice itself. To us, millions of years later, it would appear as though it had never been there at all. We already know how fragile ice is as an archive, and yet, paradoxically, it does sometimes preserve. Within glaciers, tiny bubbles of air have survived for hundreds of thousands of years, giving us a record of ancient climates. In Siberian permafrost, the bodies of mammoths still lie intact, their flesh and fur preserved as though they had fallen only yesterday. If a civilization of ice once existed, perhaps a few frozen fragments remain, hidden deep within glaciers not yet melted, or buried in permafrost layers untouched by time. But the odds of such survival across millions of years are vanishingly small. More likely, their story, if it ever was, melted and flowed away long ago. There is also the question of memory and myth. Across cultures, stories of frozen lands appear again and again. Norse mythology speaks of Niflheim, a world of mist and ice. Inuit traditions tell of spirits dwelling in frozen places. Even Plato's Atlantis, though not described as icy, has sometimes been linked by imagination to the idea of land swallowed during climate shifts. Could such myths, passed down through generations, be faint echoes of ancient encounters with civilizations in icy landscapes? We cannot know, but myths often outlast monuments, carrying shadows of memory that stone itself cannot preserve. The thought of civilizations of ice also forces us to reconsider what it means to leave a trace. We assume permanence is tied to durability, that what is remembered must be carved in stone or cast in metal. But what if impermanence itself was part of the design? A people of ice may have embraced transience, building with full knowledge that their creations would one day vanish. Perhaps their measure of greatness was not endurance but renewal, the ability to create beauty in a medium destined to melt away. Their legacy would not be ruins, but cycles of creation, lives fully lived and then absorbed back into the earth without resistance. We already see glimpses of this in our own time. The ice hotels built in northern countries are temporary wonders, reconstructed each winter and allowed to melt in spring. They are testaments not to permanence, but to the beauty of impermanence. Visitors walk through halls of sculpted ice, knowing they are stepping into something that will not exist for long. Perhaps ancient civilizations, if they arose in frozen ages, lived by the same rhythm, finding meaning in the moment rather than in the monument. And so the silence of the ice becomes profound. It is a silence that swallows sound, that swallows memory, that leaves behind only water flowing back into the seas. If civilizations once lived here, their voices have melted into rivers, their walls into lakes, their songs into winds. We cannot follow them, for the medium that carried their memory has already gone. All we can do is wonder, standing at the edge of glaciers today, whether the frozen landscapes beneath our feet once held lives as complex and rich as ours. In the end, the idea of civilizations of ice is not about proving what was, but about recognizing what could have been. It expands our sense of possibility, reminding us that life and intelligence are not bound to warm valleys and fertile plains. They could have arisen in cold, adapted to harshness, flourished in places we would find uninhabitable. Their memory may be gone, erased by melting, but their possibility remains. And in that possibility lies a lesson. Permanence is not the only path to meaning. Sometimes, the most beautiful civilizations are those that vanish without a trace, carried away like snowflakes melting on the hand of time. Chapter 11. Alternative Intelligence. When we think of civilizations, we almost always imagine them as mirrors of ourselves, humans, or human-like beings, shaping tools, building cities, writing words, and gazing up at the stars. But intelligence does not have to look like us, or think like us, or even leave behind the kinds of traces we expect. On Earth today, we share our world with creatures whose intelligence takes entirely different forms: octopuses that solve puzzles, crows that use tools, dolphins that invent play. These species remind us that the spark of thought is not limited to humanity, and perhaps not limited to the forms of permanence we expect from civilization. If the Earth has hosted other intelligences before us, their stories might have unfolded in ways we cannot even recognize. Consider the octopus. With no bones, no permanence, no inherited architecture, it lives as a fleeting creature of water and muscle. And yet within its short life it demonstrates problem-solving, memory, curiosity. It opens jars, learns from observation, rearranges objects in ways that seem playful or intentional. Imagine, for a moment, an age when octopuses or their ancestors had more time, more evolutionary opportunity. Could an aquatic intelligence build a civilization of its own? Not in the way we would recognize: no stone walls, no fire, no monuments, but perhaps, through the weaving of shells, the arrangement of coral, the shaping of currents, a civilization of the sea might be invisible to us now, erased entirely as oceans shifted and reefs dissolved. Its traces would not survive in fossils, because soft-bodied creatures seldom fossilize. Its memory would vanish with the tides, leaving nothing behind. Or think of corvids, the crows and ravens. Even today, they craft hooks from twigs, remember human faces, and pass knowledge through generations. They live in communities that adapt to changing environments, finding solutions in clever, often surprising ways. What if, long ago, an avian lineage reached further along that path of intelligence? What if they shaped a culture not in stone but in song, in patterns of migration, in complex social structures? Their civilization may have left no ruins, only altered landscapes, nests and seasonal rhythms, all of which would vanish as forests fell and climates shifted. We might never know it had existed, because we look for the permanence of artifacts, not the impermanence of behavior. Even dolphins and whales challenge our assumptions. Their intelligence is expressed in sound, in long, complex vocalizations that may carry meanings we cannot decipher. They have no hands to shape tools, no fire to smelt metals, but they have societies, play, teaching, perhaps even traditions passed through generations. If their civilizations existed, they would not build cities on land but networks in water, invisible to us, once their voices faded. The ocean, with its silence of preservation, would erase their history swiftly. Only myths of sea people, whispered by human imagination, might remain as echoes of what was once real. The deeper question here is not whether these species did in fact create civilizations, but whether our definition of civilization is too narrow. We look for ruins and artifacts, but perhaps civilizations can exist without leaving such marks. Perhaps intelligence does not always manifest in building, but in song, in movement, in memory. Perhaps whole civilizations have come and gone on Earth, made not of stone and steel, but of language, dance, migration, or even chemical signals. These would vanish entirely, leaving no more trace than a bird's call carried on the wind. Think, too, of insect societies. Ants and termites build vast colonies with complex structures, ventilation systems, farming, and social organization. To us, they are instinct-driven, mechanical. But what if, in some distant epoch, a species of insect reached further into complexity? What if their civilization was expressed in soil, in pheromones, in the shaping of environments? Such a civilization might rise and fall entirely within the cycles of ecosystems, leaving nothing behind that a geologist could recognize. It would be real, it would be rich, but it would not be legible to us. This raises a deeper mystery. If intelligence itself can take many forms, then what counts as a trace? When we imagine lost civilizations, we look for monuments. But a civilization of whales might leave only altered fish populations. A civilization of birds might leave only traces of unusual migrations. A civilization of insects might leave only altered soil chemistry. After millions of years, all of these would vanish into the churn of Earth's processes. And so we might be walking over the forgotten worlds of alternative intelligences without realizing it. Our own species is still haunted by myths that seem to gesture toward other kinds of beings. Legends of serpent people, of bird tribes, of sea people who sang and vanished. These may be imagination, or they may be distorted memories of interactions with other species whose intelligence we glimpsed but did not fully understand. Even today, we share the planet with intelligences that puzzle us, and we often underestimate them. How much more might we have overlooked in deeper time? Alternative intelligence also forces us to confront our bias toward permanence. We assume that the purpose of civilization is to endure, to build monuments, to leave marks. But what if the purpose is simply to exist fully in the moment? A civilization of song does not last, but in its time it is rich and meaningful. A civilization of movement leaves no ruins, but its cycles may have shaped ecosystems for millennia. To dismiss these as not civilization is perhaps to limit ourselves, to narrow our imagination too tightly. And here lies the quiet wonder. Perhaps Earth has already hosted many civilizations. Some of stone and metal perhaps, some of wood and fibre, some of ice. And some, more fleeting, expressed only in behaviour, sound, or subtle environmental change. Civilizations we cannot recognize because we do not know how to look for them. Civilizations that left no ruins, but lived as fully and richly as we do. Their silence is not absence. It is simply the kind of presence that does not translate into our language of history. So, as we reflect on the possibility of alternative intelligence, we are reminded that we are not the measure of all things. Our form of civilization is one expression among countless possible. The Earth is vast, its history longer than our imagination can stretch. Within that span, there was room for many experiments, many ways of being intelligent. Some may have left traces we will never recognize. Some may have vanished without a whisper. And yet, in contemplating them, we are reminded of the fragile wonder of our own moment, that intelligence, however it appears, is a rare and fleeting gift, one that may not always leave behind ruins, but always leaves behind meaning. Chapter 12. Myths as Memories. Across every culture, in every corner of the world, stories rise from the deep past. They are told in whispers around fires, carved into stone, sung in chants that stretch across generations. Myths are often dismissed as invention fantasies, allegories, attempts to explain the unexplainable before science arrived. And yet, within their fabric, there lingers a haunting possibility. What if some myths are not inventions at all, but distorted memories of things that truly happened? If Earth has hosted civilizations before us, perhaps their last echoes survive not in ruins or artifacts, but in the myths we carry unknowingly through time. Consider the legend of Atlantis. Plato wrote of a grand island civilization, advanced and powerful, that vanished into the sea in a single catastrophic night. Most scholars see this as allegory, a moral tale disguised as history, yet the story resonates too strongly, repeating in different forms across the world. Flood myths appear on every continent. Cultures that never met tell of waters rising, of lands swallowed, of peoples dispersed. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts a great flood. In Hebrew tradition, Noah builds an ark. In Hindu myth, Manu is warned by a fish to prepare for rising waters. In Native American stories, tribes speak of floods that reshape the land. Are these coincidences? Or do they echo ancient events, perhaps even the drowning of civilizations we have forgotten? Floods are, of course, real. Sea levels have risen and fallen dramatically throughout Earth's history. Entire regions, once dry, are now submerged. So perhaps the myths are simply cultural memories of real climate events. But the possibility remains that what was lost in those floods was not only land, but civilizations. If people once built great societies along coastlines now underwater, their ruins would have vanished, but their memory might have survived in stories. And stories, unlike stone, travel. They can cross oceans, they can be retold and reshaped, carried like embers from one age into another. Myths also speak of beings not like us. Across cultures there are tales of gods and giants, of serpent people, of bird tribes, of visitors who came from the sea or the sky. To modern ears, these are symbols, metaphors for natural forces or human struggles. But what if they are also faint echoes of encounters with other intelligences? Perhaps alternative civilizations, whether of animals, hybrids, or even earlier humans, once lived alongside our ancestors, their presence later translated into myth when memory grew dim. The serpent people of Mesoamerican lore, the Nagas of India, the feathered beings of Native American traditions, could these be distorted recollections of real cultures, once so different from us that they were remembered only as something other? Even stories of underworlds might carry a hidden resonance. Myths of subterranean realms, Hades in Greece, Agartha in Tibetan lore, vast underground kingdoms in many cultures are often understood as metaphors for death. But could they also recall a time when people actually lived underground, perhaps in caves or tunnels during harsh climates? If civilizations of stone, wood, or ice are erased by time, perhaps myths are the only vessels that carried fragments of their reality into our age. The challenge, of course, is that myths are never simple. They are layered, reshaped, embroidered through centuries of retelling. What began as memory can easily transform into metaphor. A real flood becomes a divine punishment. A real encounter becomes a tale of gods. The details shift until the origin is unrecognizable. Yet the persistence of certain patterns across cultures hints at something more. Why do so many distant peoples share the same motifs? Floods, lost lands, golden ages, beings of fire or water or sky. Perhaps it is coincidence, born from shared human imagination. Or perhaps it is memory, blurred but not erased. There is a quiet humility in considering myths as possible archives. Archaeology gives us stones and bones, but myths give us whispers. They are the voices of the past that we cannot verify but also cannot silence. They remind us that history is not only material but also cultural, and that memory can survive in forms we are quick to overlook. Perhaps our ancestors carried stories of real places and real events, passing them on until their details blurred but their essence endured. If lost civilizations once lived, perhaps myths are the only place where they still speak. And even if myths are not literal, they are meaningful. They point to humanity's intuition that the past is deeper than we can see, that there are worlds behind us we no longer remember. Myths of golden ages suggest that people have always sensed cycles of rise and fall. Myths of great catastrophes remind us that the earth reshapes itself suddenly, without warning, sweeping away whole societies. Myths of other beings remind us that intelligence and power are not always human-shaped. Whether or not they preserve actual memories, they preserve the possibility of forgotten worlds. To sit with myths is to listen to voices that do not speak clearly, but still speak. They are like echoes across a canyon, distorted, stretched, but carrying a hint of the original call. When we hear those echoes, we cannot reconstruct the words, but we can feel their presence. In the same way, myths may not tell us directly of lost civilizations, but they remind us that forgetting is not complete. Something lingers, however faint. And so, as we wonder whether Earth's first civilizations left no trace, we must also consider that perhaps they left a different kind of trace, not in stone, but in story. Not in ruins, but in myths that travelled across time. The silence of archaeology may never confirm them, but the persistence of these stories keeps the possibility alive. Perhaps that is the truest legacy of forgotten civilizations, that even if their material world was erased, their presence still hums softly in the myths we continue to tell. Myths that keep us aware of the deep, mysterious memory of Earth. Chapter 13. The problem of scale. When we try to place ourselves within Earth's story, it is easy to imagine that we stand at the center, that human civilization is the natural climax of a long unfolding. Our cities, our machines, our satellites orbiting far above seem to prove permanence. Yet when we widen the frame to the true scale of time, a quiet humility settles in. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. For nearly all of that span, there was no humanity at all. Our species has existed for only a few 100,000 years, and our industrial world, the skyscrapers, the engines, the glowing cities, has lasted less than 2 centuries. On a cosmic calendar, we are less than a second before midnight. And if that is true, then how can we be certain we are the first? How can we claim with confidence that no civilizations came before, when the scale of time leaves so much room for forgotten stories? Imagine compressing Earth's history into a single day. The planet forms at midnight, molten and violent. Life appears by dawn, simple cells breathing in the oceans. By afternoon, photosynthesis begins, and the atmosphere slowly fills with oxygen. Around dinner time, multicellular life flourishes. Trilobites scuttle across shallow seas. By late evening, dinosaurs roam, ruling for hours upon this clock. They vanish just before 11:40 p.m., swept away by catastrophe. Only in the last few minutes do mammals rise to prominence, and only in the last second do humans appear. All of recorded history, every temple, every empire, every book is contained within the final blink of that second. If you glance away, you miss it. And within all those earlier hours, who can say what else might have happened? Civilizations could have risen and vanished long before our tiny second began, their traces erased by the relentless turning of the clock. The problem of scale is that our minds are not built for it. We think in lifetimes, in centuries if we stretch our imagination. 1,000 years feels infinite to us. 10,000 feels unimaginable. Yet 10,000 years is less than a flicker in Earth's age. 1 million years is still short. 50 million years, the span since the last great warming event, is only a single chapter in a long book. Within that scale, civilizations could come and go many times without ever overlapping with us. Their entire histories, as long to them as ours is to us, would be swallowed in silence before we ever walked upright. Archaeology cannot reach that far back. Our tools, our dating methods, our very sense of history are bound within thousands or at most millions of years. Beyond that, the record becomes geological, not cultural. Stone layers, fossil imprints, isotopic shifts. These are the faint whispers left from ages we can hardly imagine. If civilizations rose within those spans, their memory would be reduced to anomalies in rock and subtle chemical scars. To us, they would look like natural events. We would never recognize them for what they were. Scale also plays tricks with survival. We marvel at ruins like the pyramids or the Great Wall, but these are recent, only thousands of years old. Scale them up by millions, and even stone cannot endure. Entire mountain ranges crumble in that time, coastlines vanish, oceans open and close. The Himalayas are young compared to Earth's age. The Appalachian Mountains were once higher than the Himalayas, and are now worn to gentle hills. If mountains themselves dissolve, what hope would a city have? Scale shows us that endurance is not the natural state of things. Erasure is, and there is another quiet implication. If civilizations rose in deep time, they would not necessarily look like us or measure themselves as we do. They may have lasted thousands of years and considered themselves eternal, just as we do now. But in the span of Earth, they would still be fleeting, erased as though they had never been. Scale makes even the grandest cultures humble. It reminds us that meaning does not require permanence, that even civilizations can be as brief as flowers blooming in a season. We see this truth in life itself. More than 99% of all species that ever lived are gone. Their time came, they thrived, and then they vanished. Yet each was real, each filled its moment with presence. Why should civilizations be any different? Perhaps Earth has already hosted many, some long, some short, some strange beyond our imagining. Each may have thought itself the pinnacle, each may have believed it would last forever. And yet, in the scale of Earth, each would vanish into silence, leaving only the faintest whispers, if any at all. The problem of scale is not only about the past, it also asks us to consider our own future. We imagine our cities lasting forever, our achievements carved into eternity, but measured against Earth's clock, we too are fragile. A few thousand years from now, most of our monuments will be gone. A few million, and even our chemical traces may be indistinguishable from natural signals. The same silence that erases the past will erase us too. One day, if others come after, they may stand on the same ground and ask the same question. Were there civilizations before us, erased by the immensity of time? Perhaps the most important lesson of scale is humility. We are not the measure of the Earth. We are not its first story, and we will not be its last. We are a chapter, brief and beautiful, written in a vast book that spans billions of years. To believe we are alone in that book is to mistake our page for the whole story. The silence between chapters may not mean nothing was written there. It may only mean that the words have faded, the paper has been recycled, the ink has dissolved. What remains is the possibility, and the wonder of imagining what might have filled those blank spaces. And so, when we think about Earth's first civilizations leaving no trace, we must always remember the scale. Our eyes and tools are too small to read the vastness fully. We see fragments, we hear echoes, but most of the story is gone. That does not mean it was never there. It only means that time is larger than memory, and the Earth is older than history. And in that vast silence, there is room for countless forgotten worlds. Chapter 14, Natural Disguises. One of the strangest and most unsettling ideas about forgotten civilizations is not that they left no trace, but that their traces might already be in front of us disguised as natural features. When we walk through the world, we assume we can tell the difference between what is natural and what is artificial. A mountain is a mountain, a rock is a rock, a river is a river. But what if the Earth itself is so skilled at recycling, so patient in its transformations, that what was once made by intelligence now appears to us as nothing more than geology? If the planet has erased civilizations before us, perhaps it has not hidden them completely, but woven them back into its landscapes, so well that we no longer recognize what we are seeing. Think first about stone. To us, stone is permanence, the one material that endures. We cut it into blocks, carve it into statues, stack it into monuments. But over thousands or millions of years, stone too is reshaped. Edges round, carvings blur, surfaces crumble. Eventually, even the most careful construction looks like natural rockfall. Archaeologists sometimes struggle to decide whether a pile of stones is artificial or natural, especially when erosion has taken its toll. Now stretch this problem into millions of years. Could a wall become indistinguishable from a cliff? Could a carved pillar look like nothing more than an oddly shaped boulder? If so, then the line between natural and artificial is not as clear as we think. There are places today where this ambiguity already exists. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument is a vast underwater formation of terraces and flat steps. Some say it is natural, shaped by fault lines and wave action. Others argue it looks too precise, too ordered, like a structure built by human hands and then drowned. The debate remains unresolved. Similar questions surround other sites where geometric shapes or strange arrangements appear in stone. Our instinct is to look for natural explanations, and often that is correct. But the possibility lingers that in some cases, we may be dismissing what are in fact the weathered disguises of something artificial. Even landscapes themselves can play this trick. Consider mesas, plateaus, and pyramidal mountains. Their shapes are often so geometric that they look designed, and yet they are products of erosion. Could the reverse also be true? Could something designed appear, after millions of years of change, to be a natural mountain or ridge? A buried city could be compressed into stone layers. A collapsed tunnel system could be mistaken for natural caves. A quarry worked by intelligent beings could look like nothing more than an unusual cliff. The deeper we dig, the more we see how thin the line really is. We already know that human activity often mimics natural patterns. Our minds resemble caves, our canals resemble rivers, Our terraced farms resemble hillsides shaped by erosion. And over time, these human-made structures can erode further until they are indistinguishable from natural forms. If this can happen in centuries or millennia, imagine what would remain after millions of years. The disguises would be perfect. The earth would fold our works back into itself, presenting them to the future not as monuments, but as anomalous rocks, curious but explainable. Even chemistry can wear disguises. The burning of fossil fuels leaves a signature in the carbon record, a change in isotopic ratios. To us, this is evidence of industrial civilization. But when geologists study ancient carbon spikes, they attribute them to volcanic eruptions, methane releases, asteroid impacts. What if some of those spikes are actually fingerprints of forgotten civilizations? The disguise here is chemical rather than physical, but it is no less convincing. Without context, we cannot tell the difference. A civilization's industrial age could look, in the rock record, like nothing more than an unusual natural event. This raises an unsettling question. How much of what we call natural history might actually contain disguised fragments of forgotten civilizations? The safe answer is that it is all natural, that the record contains no artificial traces. But the humility of deep time suggests another possibility, that some fraction of anomalies, oddities, unexplained patterns may in fact be the faded legacies of earlier intelligence. Not clear enough to be proof, but not empty either, just disguised, hidden in plain sight. And here lies the paradox. The more time passes, the more perfect the disguise becomes. A building 1,000 years old may look ruined, but still recognizable. 1,000,000 years, and it becomes rubble. 10 million years, and it becomes indistinguishable from natural stone. By the time we encounter it, we no longer have the ability to see what it once was. The disguise is complete. And so we walk through landscapes that may be filled with forgotten structures, unable to recognize them for what they were. This thought does not diminish geology or archaeology. Rather, it deepens them. It reminds us that our interpretations are always shaped by our assumptions. We assume what we see as natural because that is the simplest explanation. But simplicity is not always truth. The earth is patient, and in its patience, it erases not by destroying but by disguising. It folds the artificial into the natural until the two are indistinguishable. The silence of forgotten civilizations may not be empty silence at all. It may be a silence dressed in stone, so complete that we no longer hear it. To stand before a mountain, to touch a weathered rock, to look across a desert plain, these acts feel ordinary. Yet if we let the thought in, even for a moment, we may wonder, what if this is not only the work of wind and water? What if beneath the disguise lies something else, something ancient, something erased so thoroughly that only its shape remains? We cannot know for sure. And perhaps that is the essence of Earth's story. Not certainty, but the possibility that what looks natural may, in the deep past, have been something more. Chapter 15. Extinctions and Erasures. One of the deepest truths about life on Earth is that it has never been continuous. Again and again, the planet has reset itself through events so vast and sudden that entire branches of existence vanished overnight. These are the mass extinctions, the erasures that punctuate the story of the Earth. They remind us that survival is fragile, that permanence is an illusion, and that the traces of what came before can be swept away in an instant. If civilizations arose in ages far earlier than our own, their legacies would have faced not only the slow erosion of time, but the violent interruptions of these great erasures. In such moments, the Earth does not simply forget, it wipes its memory clean. There have been at least 5 great mass extinctions, and many smaller ones. Each reset the stage, ending one kind of world and beginning another. The Ordovician-Silurian extinction, hundreds of millions of years ago, saw nearly all marine life swept away. Later came the Devonian extinction, which transformed the seas once again. The most devastating of all, the Permian extinction, erased more than 90% of species, leaving the Earth almost barren before life clawed its way back. Dinosaurs themselves rose only after that catastrophe, and their reign ended with the asteroid that struck 66 million years ago, paving the way for mammals. Each of these events erased not only species but ecosystems, landscapes, and histories. If civilizations existed in those times, their memory would have been buried under ash, drowned in rising seas, or melted into lava. nothing would remain but silence. To imagine this more clearly, think of our own world. If humanity vanished tomorrow, our cities might endure for centuries, perhaps millennia, before eroding into fragments. But if, during that time, a catastrophic asteroid struck or massive volcanic eruptions blanketed the globe, the erasure would be nearly complete. Buildings would be pulverized, continents reshaped, oceans rebalanced. Within millions of years, nothing would remain. The geological record would hold only faint anomalies, traces of metals, perhaps a thin line of plastic or radioactive isotopes. Everything else would be gone. If that is true for us, how much more complete would the erasure be for civilizations that may have arisen tens or hundreds of millions of years ago, erased not only by time but by extinction? Extinctions are double erasures. First, they remove the life itself, the creatures and cultures that lived in a given age. Then they bury their environments under new layers as the world reorganizes in the aftermath. Forests vanish, seas dry up or flood, climates transform, the surface of the earth is remade. What once was a fertile plain becomes a desert. What once was a city might become the bed of an ocean. Even if traces remained briefly, they would soon be covered, shattered, and lost within the churn of recovery. By the time new life flourished, the old world was already unrecognizable. This raises a haunting possibility. Perhaps civilizations did arise before us, but they were swept away in these resets. Perhaps they lived long, meaningful lives, only to be caught in catastrophes that gave them no chance to endure. Their ruins might have been preserved for a short while, but when forests burned, oceans rose, and ash fell thick across the skies, those ruins would be obliterated. Even if fossils formed, they would be scarce, scattered, and difficult to distinguish from natural remains. To us, millions of years later, there would be nothing left to find. Their existence would be as silent as if it had never happened at all. The erasures remind us of how fragile our own civilization is. We imagine ourselves as permanent, yet we live on a restless planet that has ended worlds many times before. A supervolcano could darken skies for years. An asteroid could arrive tomorrow. Climate could shift suddenly, as it has so often. Our memory too could be erased. If the Earth has done this before, why not again? And if we ourselves could be erased so thoroughly, then it becomes easier to imagine that others before us might already have been lost. But extinctions also carry another meaning. They are not only ends, they are beginnings. After each catastrophe, life reshaped itself, finding new forms, new experiments. Mammals rose after dinosaurs. Flowering plants spread after earlier forests were destroyed. Each erasure cleared the stage for something new. If civilizations were erased, their absence may have opened space for others to rise. We might ourselves be living not as the first, but as the latest attempt, the newest in a long line of experiments the Earth has hosted. Our presence today might be the echo of many forgotten worlds, each erased in turn, each leaving only the conditions that allowed the next to flourish. There is something both humbling and strangely comforting in this thought. It humbles us because it shows how fragile we are, how easily our memory could vanish. But it comforts us because it suggests we are part of a larger rhythm, a cycle of renewal that does not end with erasure, but continues with transformation. The Earth forgets, yes, but in its forgetting it makes room for new stories. And perhaps that is the way civilizations are meant to be, not eternal but fleeting, each one a chapter that is written and then cleared to make space for the next. When you stand before a mountain or gaze at a fossil, you are looking at what little has survived these cycles of destruction. Most of what lived is gone forever, swept away by extinctions and erasures. The silence of the past is not emptiness. It is the result of countless worlds lost. And within that silence, there may be room for the memory of civilizations we will never know. They were erased as thoroughly as species, swept away not because they were unimportant, but because the Earth itself does not keep its past intact. So when we ask if Earth's first civilizations left no trace, we must remember the erasures. It is not only time that hides them, not only erosion or disguise. It is catastrophe, sudden and absolute, the hand of the Earth wiping the slate clean. Their stories, if they existed, are gone, yet their possibility lingers, reminding us that even if we are the only civilization, we are not immune. One day, we too may be erased, leaving nothing behind but a thin line in stone, indistinguishable from the countless lines that came before. Chapter 16. If we vanish today. It can be unsettling, yet strangely calming, to imagine a future without us. What if humanity simply disappeared tomorrow, not with fire or war, but in silence, as if the earth exhaled and we were gone? The thought experiment is simple but revealing. How long would our world remain visible, and what would survive of us in the deep future? By asking this, we not only glimpse our own fragility, but also better understand why earlier civilizations, if they existed, might have vanished so completely. Picture a city, emptied of people overnight. For the first few days it would look unchanged. Lights would still glow until power stations shut down. Water would run until pumps failed. Trains would sit idle on tracks. Planes would wait motionless at airports. But within weeks the signs of abandonment would spread. Without maintenance, pipes would burst, flooding streets and buildings. Fires might break out, unchecked by human hands, consuming blocks at a time. Weeds would sprout through cracks in pavement, and animals would begin to reclaim the spaces we once held. Within a year, nature's reclamation would be unmistakable. Roads would buckle under roots, gardens would spread beyond fences, birds would nest in traffic lights. Insects and rodents would multiply without restraint. Wolves, deer, and wild boar would wander into suburbs. The outlines of the city would remain, but already the signs of life would shift from human to wild. Our absence would be felt in every corner, but the structures we left would still stand for now. Give the earth a century, and most of what we built would crumble. Wooden houses would rot, roofs would collapse, steel frames would rust and weaken, concrete would crack under frost and vines. Skyscrapers, which feel so permanent, would fall one by one as their cores corroded. Bridges would collapse into rivers, highways would become green corridors of forest. Only the most durable structures, stone monuments, underground tunnels, and some dams would endure past this point. But even they would weaken with each passing century. After 1,000 years, the disguise would be nearly complete. Cities would exist only as strange rises in the land, covered by forests or meadows. A few stone structures might remain, but weathered, crumbling, unrecognizable. Our written words, books, screens, signs would be gone. Plastics might still exist, though degraded into fragments scattered across soils and oceans. Metals would have corroded into dust. A future species, wandering through, would see little evidence that billions of humans once filled the world. To them, the planet would appear natural, unmarked, save for subtle changes in species distribution and soil chemistry. On the scale of tens of thousands of years, even those remnants would fade. Forests would come and go with climate cycles. Rivers would cut new paths, burying old landscapes. Ice might advance again, grinding everything beneath it. What little remained of our presence would be swept aside. Fossils might form from a handful of bones or artifacts, but these would be rare and scattered. The chances of another civilization discovering them millions of years later would be slim, just as our own fossil record represents only a fraction of all the species that ever lived. And yet, some traces would linger. The carbon we have released into the air would leave a signature in the geological record, a thin line marking a sudden spike in greenhouse gases. The plastics we created would form new layers of sediment, strange polymers pressed into stone. The radioactive isotopes from our nuclear activities would endure for millennia, faint but measurable. These would not look like cities or tools, but like chemical anomalies. If another intelligence came after us, this is what they might find. Not our monuments, but our impact written in the language of geology. This exercise in imagination reveals a quiet truth. The earth forgets quickly. Our sense of permanence is an illusion. Even our most ambitious creations are temporary when measured against the patience of stone, water, and wind. If we vanished today, within a few million years almost nothing of us would remain, except faint chemical whispers. And if that is true for us, then how much more easily could other civilizations have vanished before us? Their memory could have been erased so thoroughly that we will never know they were here. There is a humility in realizing how fragile our presence is. We think of ourselves as masters of the planet, yet in truth we are brief visitors. The earth was here long before us, and it will continue long after. Our works, our stories, our struggles, all of them will pass. That does not make them meaningless, it makes them precious. Their value lies not in endurance, but in their existence at all. To live, to create, to imagine, even for a short time, is enough. Perhaps this is why contemplating our disappearance brings a strange peace. It reminds us that we are part of a larger cycle, one that does not need us to continue. If we vanish, the forests will return, the seas will rise and fall, the skies will clear. Life will go on, adapting, reshaping, inventing new forms. The earth does not mourn what it loses, it transforms, and in that transformation there is beauty. So when we wonder whether Earth's first civilizations left no trace, we need only look at ourselves. We see how quickly our world would fade if we were gone. We see how even the grandest of human achievements could vanish into silence within a few thousand years. If another civilization once walked this planet, their erasure would have been complete. And one day, ours will be too. The only certainty is that the Earth will endure, carrying forward in its long, patient rhythm, while our stories, like so many before us, melt quietly into the past. Chapter 17. The Search for Subtle Clues. If civilizations before us once flourished and vanished, their ruins are unlikely to wait in plain sight. Stone crumbles, wood rots, metals rust, and ice melts. Over millions of years, the Earth erases almost everything, but not quite everything. Some whispers linger not in towering monuments or buried cities, but in subtle signatures, faint imprints on the fabric of the planet itself. To search for forgotten civilizations, we must look not for walls or statues, but for traces woven into sediments, ice, chemistry, and fossil records. The question becomes not whether such civilizations left great monuments, but whether they left small, nearly invisible scars upon the Earth's memory. One of the most telling clues could be found in the air itself. Today, we are altering the chemical balance of the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels. This leaves a distinctive fingerprint, a change in the ratio of carbon isotopes. Future geologists, millions of years from now, would see this signature in ice cores and sediment layers. It would appear as a sudden, sharp shift, a spike that does not fit natural cycles. If another civilization long ago burned its own fuels, its mark would look similar. To us, it might appear as an ancient climate event, a warming period, an unexplained rise in carbon dioxide. We would assume volcanoes or methane bursts. Yet what if some of these events are not natural? What if they are the disguised shadows of industry, erased in every form except chemistry? Sediments also hold stories. Rivers and oceans carry the remains of civilizations into the seabed, where they are pressed into layers of rock. If industrial activity spread heavy metals, synthetic compounds, or plastics across the world, those materials would become part of the geological record. In our time, microplastics are already being deposited in sediments, forming what some scientists call a plastiglomerate, a new kind of rock born from human industry. Millions of years from now, that rock may still exist, telling future eyes that a civilization once transformed its planet. If earlier civilizations also invented materials unnatural to geology, perhaps their residues are buried deep in stone. The problem is recognizing them. A compound we dismiss as natural might have been in truth artificial. Without knowing what to look for, we may already be overlooking such clues. Fossils might also tell us something, though not in obvious ways. Civilization leaves patterns in the remains of life. Domestication changes the shape of animals and plants. Industrialization leaves chemical traces in bones. Today, animals carry signatures of pollution, mercury, plastics, even radionuclides. Crops are spread across continents far from their origins, altering ecosystems. If an earlier civilization reshaped the world, it too may have left behind altered species, scattered distributions, or strange chemical markers in fossilized remains. These would not look like tools or buildings. They would look like oddities in the fossil record, puzzling but explainable. Perhaps we already see them without realizing their deeper meaning. Ice, too, can be an archive. Within glaciers, tiny bubbles trap samples of ancient air. Layers of ice preserve records of volcanic eruptions, fires, and climate shifts. In Antarctica and Greenland, cores drilled deep into the ice reveal hundreds of thousands of years of Earth's atmosphere. If we drill further, perhaps millions of years, could we find traces of industry and epochs where none should exist? Chemical anomalies, strange soot layers, unexplained warming events, all of these might whisper of forgotten ages. But the ice itself is fragile, melting even now. If such records exist, they are vanishing as quickly as we think to seek them. There are also the sudden transitions in Earth's climate, the ones science cannot fully explain. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, 56 million years ago, was one such event. A rapid spike in carbon dioxide, a sudden warming, a reshaping of ecosystems. Mainstream science explains it with natural processes, but the Silurian hypothesis asks whether such events could also be the fingerprints of civilizations. Without monuments or artifacts, such spikes are the only clues we could hope to find. They do not prove anything, but they invite us to keep questioning. Searching for subtle clues requires us to expand our imagination. We are trained to look for buildings, for statues, for pottery, but perhaps civilizations do not always leave such things. Perhaps their traces are environmental rather than architectural. A forest empire might leave only altered soil chemistry. A civilization of ice might leave no trace at all. An aquatic intelligence might leave patterns in coral or currents, gone as soon as seas changed. What we must learn to recognize are the indirect signs, the footprints too faint to be seen, but not too faint to exist. The danger, of course, is seeing patterns where there are none. The Earth is full of anomalies, and most are natural. Volcanic eruptions can mimic industrial carbon spikes. Asteroid impacts can scatter metals across layers of rock. Fires can leave soot that looks like burning. In the end, nature is often stranger and more dramatic than we expect. Yet the possibility remains that in a few of these anomalies, hidden among the countless natural events, lies the echo of something else. Something that was once alive, intelligent, and creative. The search for subtle clues is not just about forgotten civilizations, it is also about ourselves. We wonder whether our own traces will endure, whether someone millions of years from now will recognize that we were here. We realize that what will survive of us is not our cities, not our art, but our impact on air, water, and stone. We too will be reduced to chemical scars, faint anomalies in the record. If we can imagine our own memory fading in this way, then we can also imagine that others before us may already have faded in the same way. Perhaps the most haunting part of this search is that we may never know. The clues, if they exist, are faint, subtle, easy to miss. They may be buried too deep or erased too thoroughly. Yet the act of searching itself matters. It widens our perspective, reminding us that the Earth is older than we can fathom, and that history may be deeper than what we see. To search for subtle clues is to acknowledge that silence is not proof of absence, that memory can take forms quieter than monuments. It is an invitation to listen more closely, to read the whispers of stone and ice as carefully as we can, knowing that they may hold stories we have not yet learned to hear. Chapter 18. Civilizations we wouldn't recognize. When we imagine lost civilizations, we often picture them as earlier versions of ourselves, people who built with stone, carved tools, and organized societies in ways not so different from our own. But what if the civilizations that came before were nothing like us at all? What if their forms of intelligence, creativity, and community were so unlike our own that even if we stood among their ruins, we would not recognize them as such? Perhaps the greatest obstacle to finding traces of Earth's first civilizations is not that they left nothing behind, but that we do not know how to see what they left. Civilization, as we define it, is shaped by our human experience. We think of agriculture, cities, language, technology, but these are only one expression of intelligence. On Earth today, we already see alternative forms. Whales create vast soundscapes, complex songs that may carry information across oceans. Bees and ants construct societies with intricate roles, engineering their environments through instinctive cooperation. Fungi form vast underground networks, exchanging nutrients and signals across miles of forest floor. To us, these are not civilizations, but perhaps that is only because they are not shaped in our image. If intelligence once arose along different lines, it may have built worlds we cannot interpret. Imagine a civilization of fungi, its structures hidden underground in webs of hyphae stretching for miles. To us it would look like soil, indistinguishable from natural processes. But within it, information could have flowed, decisions could have been made, networks of exchange and adaptation could have formed a kind of collective mind. If such a civilization once existed, its traces would be gone the moment its living networks died. Stone preserves, but organic networks do not. We would never know they had been there. Or imagine a civilization of insects, not like the ants and bees we know, but something more complex, more intentional. Their constructions might have been made of resin, wax, or soil structures immense and delicate, but fragile against time. They may have reshaped ecosystems, cultivated other species, organized their colonies into patterns of astonishing sophistication. But in the fossil record, all that would remain would be traces of unusual soil chemistry or fossilized burrows. To us, it would look like nothing more than strange environmental activity, not the ruins of a civilization. We can stretch the imagination further. What if intelligence did not rely on physical construction at all? A civilization might have expressed itself entirely in sound, in song carried across landscapes, never recorded in matter. Or it could have existed in migration patterns, vast coordinated movements of beings across continents, writing its culture in the shifting shapes of its journeys. Or perhaps it lived in the ocean, shaping coral reefs, directing currents, weaving its world out of the sea itself. Such civilizations would leave behind little we would recognize. Their legacy would be erased with the death of their carriers, leaving no monuments, no artifacts, only faint anomalies we might mistake for nature. The challenge is that we look for ourselves in the past. When archaeologists study ruins, they interpret them through human categories, tools, buildings, art. If something does not fit these categories, it risks being dismissed as natural. A patterned stone is seen as erosion, not inscription. A fossilized structure is taken for coral, not construction. Our definitions of civilization limit what we can recognize. If intelligence once arose in non-human forms, it may be invisible to us, not because it left no trace, but because we are not able to see its traces as cultural at all. This is where humility becomes essential. We are not the measure of all intelligence. Our way of living is not the only possible way. If Earth has hosted civilizations before us, they may have been so alien in form and expression that we would not know how to name them. We may already be walking past their remains, cataloguing them as geology or biology, never realizing what they once were. The disguise is not only in the Earth's erasure, but in our own assumptions. There are hints, in myth and story, of civilizations that seem strange to us. Tales of beings who lived in the sea, who spoke in songs, who moved in patterns invisible to human eyes. Legends of peoples who lived in the trees or underground, who vanished without explanation. We interpret these as imagination, but they may be distorted memories of encounters with ways of living that were different enough from ours to seem mythical. If such civilizations ever existed, our ancestors may not have understood them, just as we struggle to imagine them today. The thought that civilizations may exist beyond our recognition is unsettling. It means that even if we held evidence in our hands, we might not see it for what it is. It means that silence may not be silence, but misunderstanding. It means that the earth could be full of echoes we are not tuned to hear. But it is also liberating. It reminds us that civilization is not a fixed shape, not a single path, but a possibility that can take many forms. To imagine other kinds of civilizations is to imagine other ways of being intelligent, other ways of finding meaning in existence. In the end, the question is not only whether civilizations came before us, but whether we are capable of recognizing them if they did. Our vision is narrow, shaped by our own experience. The Earth, however, is vast, older and stranger than our imagination. Within its history, there may have been civilizations we would not recognize, fleeting, alien, beautiful in their own ways, but invisible to us now. And perhaps that is the quiet truth. The world may be full of forgotten stories, not because they were never told, but because we do not yet know how to read them. Chapter 19. Lessons in Humility. To imagine civilizations before us is to practice a kind of humility. It is to admit that we may not be the first to walk this path, that our presence on Earth may not be unique or inevitable. The silence of the past tempts us to believe we are alone, that intelligence bloomed only once and that we are its pinnacle. But the deeper we look into time, the more fragile that belief becomes. Civilizations may have risen and vanished long before us, their traces erased by erosion, floods, fire, and scale. If that is possible, then our own place in the story of Earth becomes smaller, humbler, and perhaps more beautiful. Humility begins with scale. We are a young species, barely a blink in the clock of Earth's history. Civilizations, as we know them, are younger still, only a few thousand years. The Earth has been reshaping itself for billions of years. Mountains rise and crumble, oceans open and close, continents drift and collide. Against that backdrop, our buildings and technologies are fragile things. They feel solid to us, but in geological time they are as fleeting as foam on a wave. If we disappeared tomorrow, almost nothing of us would remain after a few million years. That realization forces us to reconsider the silence of deep time. If we ourselves would vanish so easily, then how can we be certain others did not vanish before us? Humility also comes from perspective. We often imagine ourselves as the peak of evolution, the natural culmination of life's story. But life is not a ladder. It is a branching tree full of experiments and dead ends. Intelligence itself may be one of those experiments, appearing more than once in different forms. Perhaps it flourished in ways we cannot recognize. Perhaps it vanished before it could leave enduring marks. To believe we are the only intelligence is to mistake survival for inevitability. We are not the conclusion of Earth's story, but one of its many chapters. Others may have come before, others may come after. This thought can feel unsettling, but it is also grounding. It reminds us that we are not the masters of the Earth, but participants within it. Our presence is conditional, dependent on the planet's balance. We live in a narrow band of climate and stability, a temporary window that allows us to flourish. That window will not stay open forever. The Earth changes as it always has, and we must either adapt or vanish. Humility is the recognition that permanence is not promised, that survival is not guaranteed. Yet humility is not despair, it is clarity. It is the understanding that meaning does not come from permanence but from presence. Civilizations before us, if they existed, may have vanished without a trace. Their songs, their stories, their inventions may be gone, but in their time they were real. They filled their world with meaning, even if that meaning did not endure. The same is true for us. Our skyscrapers and satellites may one day dissolve into dust, but while we live, they matter. Our lives matter. Our presence matters. Humility reminds us that impermanence does not erase significance. It also teaches us to listen more carefully. If we believe we are the only civilization, we risk ignoring subtle clues in the Earth's record. We dismiss anomalies as natural without asking what else they might mean. We assume silence means absence, when it may simply mean erasure. Humility asks us to widen our imagination, to consider possibilities beyond our own reflection. Perhaps the odd carbon spikes in the geological record are not only volcanoes. Perhaps the strange geometries of stone are not only erosion. Perhaps the myths of lost golden ages are not only allegory. Humility does not claim certainty. It simply leaves space for wonder, for the possibility that the Earth remembers more than we think. There is also a lesson here about our own future. If we see ourselves as eternal, we may act carelessly, believing our presence is unshakable. But if we see ourselves as fragile, temporary, and small, we may live more wisely. We may learn to value the present, to care for what we have, to treat our world with respect. Humility teaches us that we are not the owners of the Earth, but its guests. Our survival depends not on conquering it, but on living within its rhythms. This perspective can even bring comfort. The idea that civilizations may have come and gone before us means we are not alone in our impermanence. Others may have lived, loved, created, and vanished, just as we will. Their memory may be gone, but their existence was no less real. To be part of this pattern is not to be diminished, it is to be connected to something larger than ourselves. We are part of the great experiment of life on Earth, an experiment that has unfolded for billions of years and will continue long after we are gone. So when we ask if Earth's first civilizations left no trace, the truest answer may be humility. We do not know. We may never know. The Earth's memory is too vast, its process is too thorough. But in sitting with that uncertainty, we find perspective. We are reminded that our time is brief, our presence fragile, our meaning not guaranteed by survival. And in that humility, we may also find wonder, the wonder of knowing we are part of a story larger than we can comprehend, a story filled with silences that may hold forgotten worlds. To walk the Earth with humility is to see ourselves not as the masters of history, but as participants in mystery. Perhaps others came before us. Perhaps others will come after. Either way, our task is the same: to live fully within our moment, to create meaning while we can, and to remember that even if our traces vanish, our presence was real. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson humility can offer. Chapter 20. Reflection. As we arrive at the end of this long journey of imagination, a stillness settles in. We have wandered through forests that might have hidden empires, walked along drowned coastlines where waves erased whole worlds, peered into ice that may once have held palaces, and listened to the whispers of myths that echo like distant memories. We have looked for civilizations not in stone but in silence, in the faint marks left behind or perhaps erased so thoroughly that only wonder remains. What we find, after all this, is not certainty but reflection, a quiet acknowledgement of how little we know, and how much beauty there is in that not knowing. The Earth is ancient beyond comprehension. It has turned for billions of years, reshaping itself countless times, carrying life through extinctions, renewals, and transformations. Against this vastness, our moment is a blink, a breath. To think we are the first and only civilization feels natural from within our narrow frame of time, but when we widen the view, humility whispers otherwise. Perhaps there were others before us. Perhaps not. Either way, the silence of the past is deeper than we can measure, and in that silence lies both mystery and peace. If civilizations came before us, their traces may already be gone, erased by ice, drowned by seas, buried under stone, or disguised as natural patterns we cannot recognize. They may have built in wood and clay, leaving no permanence. They may have sung their culture into being, written their memory not in stone but in sound, in stories, in fleeting expressions that dissolved like mist. They may have flourished for thousands of years, only to be swept away in extinctions, erased with the same indifference that erases species. And if they are gone, what remains of them is not ruins but possibility. The possibility that life has tried this path more than once, that intelligence has bloomed and withered before. If, on the other hand, we are truly the first, that too is humbling. It means the Earth has waited billions of years for a species to shape words, to ask questions, to dream of its own past and future. It means we are fragile pioneers, carrying a responsibility we may not fully grasp. If we are alone in this story, then we are also its caretakers, the first to look back and wonder, the first to know that everything we build will someday fade. That awareness is both burden and gift. Reflection also turns inward. We have seen how quickly our own presence would vanish if we disappeared. Within centuries, our cities would crumble. Within millennia, even our monuments would dissolve. Within millions of years, only chemical scars would remain, faint whispers in rock. To future eyes, we would look no more permanent than those we now seek in vain. This recognition does not diminish us. It deepens us. It reminds us that meaning is not found in endurance, but in existence. Our lives, our cultures, our stories are real because we live them, not because they will last forever. Perhaps that is the truest gift of wandering about forgotten civilizations. It teaches us to embrace impermanence, to see the beauty of things that do not last. Civilizations of wood, of ice, of song may have vanished, but they were no less meaningful in their time. We, too, will vanish. But while we are here, we are part of the great unfolding, part of the Earth's ongoing experiment. Our task is not to endure forever, but to live fully, to create meaning in the fleeting span we are given. As night deepens and the world quiets, there is comfort in this perspective. We are not the first, perhaps, and we will not be the last. The Earth will continue long after us, carrying stories we will never know, just as it carries stories we can only imagine from its deep past. The silence of forgotten civilizations is not empty, it is full of possibility, and in listening to that silence, we are reminded of our place not as rulers of the Earth, but as brief companions in its long journey. So let us rest in the mystery. Let us accept that we may never know whether others came before us, that the traces may be gone, disguised, or unreadable. Let us find peace in the uncertainty, wonder in the silence, and humility in the scale of time. For whether we are the first civilization or only one of many, the truth is the same. We are fleeting, fragile, and yet deeply, profoundly real. Our presence matters, even if it will one day be forgotten. And as you close your eyes and drift into sleep, let this thought settle gently. The Earth is older than memory, larger than imagination, patient beyond measure. It has carried countless lives before us, and will carry countless more after. We are only here for a moment, but in that moment, we are part of something vast and beautiful. Perhaps that is all we need to know.